Hello everyone, and welcome to Fictional Vortex. So we are back with an interesting series on what if Naruto was a son of mermaids. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. And ever since that day, no human has ever seen a neither mermaid nor merman and lived to tell. A sailor finished explaining. That's very sad. A shy lady of the court replied, after listening to the sailor's tale. Lady Hinata. Hinata turned to greet her cousin Neji. What are you doing up on deck? You should stay in the captain's quarters where it's safe. Neji stated, pulling on Hinata's arm. Oh. This sailor was telling me about merpeople, Neji. Hinata stated sheepishly, while being pulled away. Merpeople? Neji repeated, questionable, stopping. These seas be filled with them, maidens and men swimming, with fishtails for feet. The sailor said, stepping in front of Neji and Hinata. Neji scoffed at him, but as he was about to retort, a person on deck caught his eye. Prince Sasuke. He bowed slightly out of respect. What are you doing out of the captain's quarters? I don't have to answer your questions. I will not be kept cooped up under someone else's orders. Sasuke finished, folding his hands over his chest, standing in front of the sailor's back. The sailor took a step towards the rails, as to not invade their conversation. It is only for your safety that Kakashi ordered you to stay in the captain's quarters. Though, Neji looked around the deck. I do not understand why he hired such a vulgar group of sailors to accompany us on this trip. Questioning my choices, Sir Neji? Kakashi asked while walking towards the small group. He stopped behind Hinata, and waited for his answer. Yes, the crew of your choice is constantly imposing themselves onto my cousin. It is my duty to protect Lady Hinata, and this crew of yours is filling her head with nonsense like merpeople. He motioned to the silent sailor. Merpeople? Sasuke asked, raising an eyebrow. Neji nodded, confirming that is what he said. Merpeople, huh? Kakashi looked at the sailor, who was still standing in front of the Hyugas, but off to the side a bit, practically leaning on the rails. You never want to be near nobles when the talk is considered rude, and you have no place near them. Sasuke was the youngest prince of the Eastern Land. Kakashi was his guardian and is also considered a member of the royal family, though not through blood. The Hyuga cousins are from a very noble family that serves under Sasuke's father, the king. It would be wise to never be in either of theirs way, but when you're stuck, I guess you don't really have a choice, so the sailor spoke up. And it be the truth. Neji and Sasuke scoffed at him. They live at the bottom of the ocean, never coming to the surface. But just waiting for us to fall in and drag us all to our deaths. He waved his hands to emphasize. Hinata looked scared and clutched her hands together. Neji noticed his cousin's fear and pushed the man aside. Do not speak to Hinata again, or I will see to it that you are punished. With that, he gripped Hinata's arm again, ruffling her dress, and walked off, dragging Hinata by her arm. Sasuke sighed and walked away, Kakashi following him. You should be in the captain's quarters, he pointed out. Sasuke replied, looking out over the sea. The waves crashed against the boat, swaying it back and forth. Kakashi sighed, knowing it would be useless if he tried to push the issue farther. This is a bad idea, Naruto. Kiba warned as they continued swimming. You scared Kiba? Naruto teased, flipping in front of his friend, then continuing to swim straight. Scaredy fish, he yelled back. What did you say? Kiba yelled, gaining speed, then when he caught up, hit his friend on the head. Naruto rubbed the spot on his head that Kiba just hit before looking at the shipwrecks in front of them. Naruto took the sight in before swimming closer to one of the ships. Whoa! Kiba screamed, grabbing Naruto's orange fins. You're not going over there. That's human stuff. You out of everyone should know not to. Kiba didn't get to finish as his friend pulled his tail out of his grip. Yeah, I've heard it all before, Kiba. Now if you want to stay here, go ahead, but I'm going in there. With that, he swam off and into one of the ships. Kiba panicked and followed Naruto into the ship. He'd be in trouble if he left Naruto alone. The guy would probably kill himself. Naruto? Where are you, dude? Kiba called out cautiously, taking all the human things. There were paintings with smeared paint, chests, jars and other little things. Naruto? I'm over here. Naruto poked his head down from the ceiling. Kiba threw himself into the opposite wall with wide eyes. Naruto. Don't do that to me. Kiba put a hand to his heart then began to catch his breath. Naruto swam over to his friend laughing, as Kiba patted down his brown hair. Man, you really are a catfish. Naruto stated, stopping his laughing fit. I am not. It's just, Kiba gestured to all the human items. These are human items, they're human items. He emphasized the last part of the sentence, hoping it would string a chord. It was forbidden to ever go to the surface or even touch any human belongings. And here was the Prince of the East Sea roaming around a human ship collecting human belongings. Oh, the joys of being the prince's best friend, right? They're just trinkets, they won't bite, and as you said I would know. Naruto stated, and went around picking things up and studying them. That's not something to brag about, Nar. Kiba stopped and looked towards the window he squeezed through to get in earlier. What? Naruto asked after Kiba fell silent, but he didn't turn around, he still studied the item in his hand. Kiba hushed him and studied the outside of the window. Then he backed away slowly, trying not to make a lot of bobbles with his red tail. Naruto, make sure you don't hurt yourself, okay? Kiba explained calmly, then turned to see Naruto sucking on his right pointer finger. His eyes widened. What are you doing? He asked somewhat quietly. Naruto pulled out his finger. It was cut slightly, leaking out a small amount of blood. I cut my finger a little, but it doesn't hurt, so it's not going to kill me or anything. Naruto explained, then continued to suck on his finger. Naruto, you idiot. There are. Shark. Naruto yelled, then swam away frantically. Kiba turned to see a pair of jaws about to clamp down on him. He screamed, then followed after Naruto's air bubbles. They swam around the corridors of the ship for some time. Naruto reached out and grabbed an item that had caught his eye, then Kiba pulled on his arm and pushed him through a busted window. He followed right after. They swam around trying to loose the shark for a while before Kiba thought of a plan. He grabbed Naruto's arm and hurled Naruto downward. Naruto, being caught off guard, spiraled downward until he stopped. He shook his head and saw the shark heading right down on him. He panicked and swam as fast as he could off to the side. The shark couldn't turn in time and hit his head against an anchor head. Naruto took deep breaths, trying to calm down as he swam up to Kiba. Naruto hit Kiba over the head and screamed, "You stupid jerk! You threw me down to get eaten." Kiba rubbed his new bruise. "I figured you'd dodge it anyway, and you're fine." He gave Naruto a smile. Naruto crossed his arms and pouted. "Hey, what y'all got there?" Kiba asked, pointing to the object Naruto had a death grip on, in his left hand. Naruto looked at the item as he loosened his hold, tearing it more. "I don't know." He shrugged, then got a huge smile on his face. "But I bet Pakun would." Kiba's eyes doubled in size, but before he could protest, Naruto started to swim to the surface. "Naruto!" Kiba yelled, swimming after him. "Hold up, will ya?" They finally made it to where Pakun would meet them. Naruto stayed in the water, his head pointing out. His wet blonde hair fell with Kiba and his brown hair. Out of the bushes up on shore came Pakun. Pakun trotted out onto the shallow part of the water and sat down, ready to answer Naruto's questions. "Hey Pakun." Naruto greeted, smiling. Kiba waved his hand lightly before immediately sticking it back into the water. "Hi Naruto, so what do you have, Todi?" Naruto held out the drenched object. Pakun studied it in Naruto's hand. It was rolled up paper tied together by a red sting that had beads at the end. "That's obviously a scroll," Pakun explained. "A scroll?" Naruto asked, not getting it. "Yes Naruto, you see, when humans want something they pull these out and then poof, out come whatever you want." "Anything they want?" Naruto asked eagerly, sticking his upper body out of the water. "Yup." Naruto smiled, then opened the scroll. Kiba made a sound of protest but stopped when nothing happened. "Pakun, why didn't it work?" Naruto asked, disappointed. "Oh, of course. In order for these to work, a human must first mark it with some form of potatoes." "Potatoes?" Kiba and Naruto asked. "It's human food," Pakun explained. Naruto and Kiba made an "oh" with their mouths before Naruto snapped up, sitting straight up. "Crap. The banquet!" Naruto yelled before diving back into the water with Kiba behind him, leaving Pakun wet and confused. Iruka paced around the main hall, glaring at the two teens from time to time. He sighed and began to rant. "I just can't believe it, Naruto. One of the biggest celebrations for our city and you miss it?" He flared his hands up into the water. "Kiba, how could you have forgotten?" I mean, this was the year your family was allowed to sit right next to the king. Your whole family was there and... Iruka stopped his ranting when trumpets sounded and the king swam over to the throne, his yellow fin glistening as he took his seat. Naruto and Kiba bowed their heads, ashamed. The king, Yodem, looked down at his son and friend disappointed. The biggest celebration of our city and you missed it. Naruto flinched at his father's tone. Kiba peered over at his friend, then returning his head back to face the shell tile. I just don't know what I'm going to do with you anymore, Naruto. He took a breath, allowing his words to sink into his son. Kiba, your family is a very proud and noble family. You would have seen me knight your father and mother, but I didn't even get to, due to your absence. Kiba hung his head lower, in shame of embarrassing his family. Naruto, noticing his friend's depression, couldn't let him take the bull of the blame. It wasn't his fault, Naruto said, raising his head, locking eyes with his father's. Yodem looked surprised to see his son speak out. Although, in truth, Naruto often did this, he never abandoned his friends. But nevertheless Yodem kept his stern face. How is it not his fault? Iruka asked, floating next to the king's side. He can't blame anyone else for him being late. But I took him out exploring, we got so caught up that we forgot. Naruto turned back to his father. It's my fault that we were late. It's not all your fault, Naruto. Kiba spoke up, putting his hand on Naruto's shoulder. I still should have remembered that the banquet was today. Yodem just stared at the two boys in front of him who were arguing over whose fault it was, for them being late. He shook his head, then turned back up, focusing on the boys and his assistant Iruka, who had joined in their argument. Just go, he bellowed. The three stopped and turned to him confused. I don't want to see you two anymore, you may leave. He waved them off. The two quickly turned and swam away. Those two, I'm not so sure it's a god idea to let them wander about the sea like they do, Iruka said, swimming in front of Yodem, his light blue tail flicking at the water. You think? The king asked, intrigued. Absolutely, they need proper supervision, someone to watch over them at all times. Iruka closed his eyes, explaining. Yodem rubbed his chin, then smiled widely. You're absolutely right, Iruka, of course. Iruka smiled. They need someone to watch over them, exactly. Someone responsible and who will always watch over them, and you are just the merman I trust with that job. Couldn't have picked a better merman. Iruka blurted out, but then after what Yodem said, what? No, I can't, I can't, he flared his hands around. Yodem smiled, then pointed to the door. You will watch over my son and Kiba while he's here. Iruka nodded, then bowed and swam off towards Naruto's room. Iruka was almost to Naruto's room, but when he looked out one of the palace's windows he saw the prince and Kiba swimming away. Iruka put on a determined face and swam through the window and swam after the boys. You're keeping that thing? Kiba pointed to the scroll Naruto was placing on a shelf. Yeah. But it doesn't even work. We need a Pota something. Kiba stated, waving his hands in defeat. How can you be expected to memorize something you only heard once? Kiba sat on the sand inside Naruto's little cave. Oh, if anyone else found this, Naruto and Kiba would be dead for sure. All along the walls of the cave were shelves sticking out, and on those shelves were human things. Tons and tons of human stuff. Naruto lightly floated down next to his friend and dipped his tail into the sand. So there you two are. Iruka burst into the caves and started yelling, but, well, when he saw all the human stuff he kind of went brain dead. Ah, Iruka. It's not what it looks like. This is. Naruto and Kiba kept throwing excuses at the merman, but he never once stopped staring at all the human items. After he did regain his senses, he grabbed the two mers by their tails and dragged them out of the cave. Naruto and Kiba exchanged worried glances as Iruka spoke. The king's going to have a fit when he hears about this. Oh, this is way past bad, you two. This is breaking a law, he emphasized. Then bright lights up on the surface caught Naruto's attention. He looked up and saw a burst of lights go off at different times, and they were different colors. Fascinated, he nudged Kiba, pointing to the surface so he could see too. The two stared at the fireworks as Iruka kept babbling about how much trouble they were in. Naruto turned and pulled out Iruka's ponytail. Iruka in response grabbed his loose hair with both hands, letting go of the boys. Naruto dropped the string that tied Iruka's hair together, then swam to the surface. Both surfaced and stared at the fireworks some more. You two. Iruka surfaced. He retied his ponytail while the two swam up to the surface. "Get back here," he called as the two swam closer towards something wooden. Naruto grabbed onto some rope and pulled himself up and sat himself on some outpost of wood. Kiba did the same but sat on another outpost of wood on the other side of Naruto. They looked back at the water and waved at Iruka, who only had his head showing. "We're so dead," Kiba said, looking around at where they were. Naruto gasped as he looked off the rails that he had to sit on his tail to reach. Kiba low look, he pointed through the railings. Kiba did and practically had a heart attack. He pressed himself firmly against the wood. "Oh my god, humans," he whispered out in terror. "Look at them all," Naruto said silently in fascination. It wasn't his first time seeing a human this close, but these humans looked different than from the other humans he saw. Kiba looked at Naruto like he was nuts. "Are you insane? Stop looking. Let's go. Sure, we'll get in trouble, but I'd rather be in trouble than dead," Kiba whispered harshly. Naruto turned and rolled his eyes at Kiba. He wanted to watch these human, specifically this one raven-haired man who had caught his attention. He was dressed in black boots, a dark blue vest with a white shirt underneath and dark pants. He also had a fan thing embroidered into the side of his shirt. He was just standing off to the side, looking as if he was trying to avoid everyone. Kiba saw that there was no changing his friend's mind, and he couldn't just leave him. He looked down and gave earway, then looked over through the rails again. He noticed the guy Naruto was watching and rolled his eyes. "He looks like a jerk." Then Kiba's eyes and ears got caught on some humans who were off to his left. This guy with long hair was standing in front of this beautiful brunette-haired girl. She had long hair, but it was done up in the back, and had some curls framing her face. All around she was gorgeous, according to Kiba. The man in front of her wore a white shirt that was buttoned up, black pants, and black boots. He didn't look very happy and the girl looked scared or nervous. Kiba couldn't tell. "Attention everyone," Kakashi announced, successfully getting everyone's attention. "First, let me thank all of you sailors for a safe voyage." Its success rate though was lacking. He eyed Sasuke, who scoffed at him, then Hinata, who turned her head down in shame, as did Neji. Naruto and Kiba exchanged glances, confused. Kakashi sighed. "Don't be ashamed, Hinata, Neji. If I was in that situation I would have done the same thing." Hinata looked up smiling. Neji grimaced at the memory. Hinata was to marry an ambassador's eldest son, but when they met him, he immediately degraded Hinata, pointing out all her flaws, making her feel more self-conscious than she already did. Neji, being the overprotective cousin that he is, told the man off, and I quote, "I will drop dead before I let my cousin marry filth like you." "Sasuke, you?" He sighed and shook his head. "I'm positive that you were purposely acting rude and aloof." Sasuke was also set up to be married, but the girl couldn't stand Sasuke's attitude and turned him away. Sasuke was very thankful that he didn't have to marry her. Naruto and Kiba again shared glances, still confused. Kiba mouthed, "What are they talking about?" Naruto shrugged. They turned back and focused on what was happening. "It was supposed to be given to you after your wedding, but," Kakashi drowned out, thinking everyone knew the rest. Sasuke examined the katana he had received. The sheath was black and had a navy blue wave line going down it. It had a golden tip and bud, also white dots were scattered around it. He smirked, then tied it to his waist. Hinata smiled, as did Kakashi. Neji just kept glaring at the crowd. "Wedding? Don't tell me he's married. Wait, it was supposed to. That means it wasn't so. He's not married, okay then." Naruto smiled. Yes, the prince had his first crush on a human. Suddenly a man raised his hand and people picked up instruments and started to play. Kiba wrinkled his nose. "Why are they dancing? Humans are weird creatures." Kiba kept watching the one girl human. She was hidden behind that long-haired guy again. "Hope they're not together." Kiba blushed. He was jealous of a human. Sasuke walked over towards the rails and bent down, slouching onto the rails, being careful for his katana, and faced the dancing fools. Naruto and Kiba had ducked when he was approaching. Once he seemed comfortable, they checked if he could see them. Didn't seem like it. As they were about to get back up to look again, the girl Kiba had been looking at walked over. They ducked again just in time. Hinata walked over and stood a fair distance away from Sasuke. She turned to face the crowd in front as well. She stood straight up and her hands were clasped in the front. Kiba poked his head up and she was standing right next to him. off to the left a bit, but he could see her face perfectly. Kiba had to make sure he wasn't drooling, but continued to gaze at her. Hinata, was that it? Well, let's call her that. Naruto eyed the guy. Sasuke was his name, right? Oh well, let's go with that. Naruto was enjoying the view. The guy slouched and gave of that talk to me and you die attitude. And to be honest, the look he had on his face sent shivers down Naruto's back. He definitely liked this guy, and as prince he should get what he likes. Iruka was going crazy. His two charges that he was to protect were staring at humans, and not jumping down. Okay, I got to get them down. As he reached for a rope to climb, he was going to pull them back into the water. A flash of light caught his attention from behind him, followed by a boom of thunder. All the people on the ship stopped what they were doing and looked to where the storm was. It was heading their way. Those winds were defined to just get them home safely. They had to bring trouble as well. Storm's a comin'. The watchman rang. All the sailors went to their posts. Then the rain started to pour, like someone flipped the on switch for it. Hinata eked as the wind pushed her dress, and the rain soaked her whole body, causing her clothes to stick to her. She reached for the railing to hold onto. Sasuke grabbed onto the railing and turned his face down to try and keep his face somewhat dry, so he could see. Kakashi raced over and grabbed a loose rope, his clothes soaked and his hair a mess. Neji helped out the sailors tie down the sails. His hair stuck to his body from the rain and his clothes stuck to his body, making his shirt almost see-through. Iruka dropped the rope he was holding as the rain poured. The angry waves pushed him against the hard wood, causing his head to bash up against the boat. The waves pulled him away from the boat and he tumbled down deeper under the water. He shook his head slightly, then checked if he was bleeding at all. Finding no blood, he looked around for Kiba and Naruto. He couldn't see them anywhere. More crashes and booms were heard from above the sea, and suddenly things started to fall into the ocean. Iruka maneuvered around the falling objects and swam up a bit, almost to the surface, looking to see if he could find Kiba or Naruto. He kept moving, thinking that would be the best way to avoid getting hit. He looked down and saw a figure down deeper in the water. Thinking it was one of his charges, he swam down to catch up to the sinking figure. As he got closer, he could make out a few things. Most importantly, he figured out it wasn't his charges but a human. The next thing he noticed was that the human was bleeding. He got a cut along his left eye. Iruka just stopped and floated around the man. He bit his bottom lip, then looked around and reluctantly turned his head towards the man. He grabbed the man from behind, then pulled on him, swimming up to the surface. Once they reached the surface, he noticed the man wasn't breathing. Looking around, he found a floating craft of some sort. A box. He threw the man's head up onto it, then pulled some air into his own lungs and opened the human's mouth. He tilted the chin slightly, brushing away any loose gray hair from the face, and held the tongue down and breathed into the man. After a few times of repeating this, the man started to breathe on his own again. Kakashi felt air returning into his system. His mind was still blurry, but he felt something pressed on his mouth, giving him air. He lazily opened his eyes and saw an outline of a brown-haired man, who had a cut across his nose. That's the only thing Kakashi could focus on, since his mind wouldn't let his other sense didn't work yet, so he didn't really want to move his eyes around to examine the figure in front of him. Sasuke. Kakashi. Hinata. Iruka heard some screams coming towards him. He could see a light above the water. Where are you? It came closer and Iruka dived under and swam farther down. He turned back up to check on the man he left. He saw the man's legs being lifted from the water. Iruka sighed, and then it hit him. Naruto, Kiba. He swung his head in all different directions looking for the two mermen. But by swimming blindly and not paying attention to where he was swimming, he got hit on the head. He became dizzy and things went blurry until everything went black. The strong current pushed his body along. When he came to, he blinked a couple of times, then realized he was leaning on something. Instead of looking over to who or what he was leaning on, he focused on the two figures in front of them. Once everything came into focus, his mouth dropped into the sand and his eyes doubled in size. 1. Kiba grabbed onto the as much as he could, but the wind was too strong and the railings he was holding onto broke. He flew into the water, tumbling deeper. After regaining his balance, again he looked around. He couldn't see Naruto or Iruka. He looked around again, being careful as to not get hit by any of the falling objects. He looked around again, when he saw a big ball of fabric, not too far from him. It seemed to be struggling like it was stuck in a fisher's net. Curious but cautious, he swam a little closer to the ball of fabric. Careful to keep his distance, he peered all around the thing trying to see what exactly it was. But no matter how many different angles he tried, he couldn't make out what it was. Then air bubbles came out rapidly from the ball, and it stopped moving. Kiba looked at it and looked around the sea. Then the fabric started to drift downwards. Overcome with curiosity, he swam over to the bundle and pulled at it. His eyes widened and he swam away from the thing immediately, bumping into a falling chest. "It's that girl. Oh my god." He swam over to her again. "Name? What was her name?" Kiba waved his arms around and closed his eyes trying to think of it. What am I doing?" He swam over to her again and just grabbed a bunch of fabric and pulled her up. He tugged on her harder, but no matter how hard he pulled, he still couldn't swim any faster. It was hard to get it off of her, but after much squirming and after him ripping the fabric some more, he successfully got the dress off of her. He saw that they were still pretty deep down and that she needed air, fast. He clasped his hand together and closed his eyes, concentrating. He pushed out the water that was in his lungs, then filled his lungs with stored up air. All merfolk had an air reserve inside of them, but the trick was to know how to access it. Holding in the new air, he grabbed the girl's chin and opened her mouth forcefully. He pushed his mouth onto hers. He sucked in all the water that was in her mouth and gave her all the air he could get out of himself. Holding her chin, he snaked an arm round her waist and swam to the surface. Once up, he dodged a falling piece of wood. Then he made sure her head was above water. He pulled his mouth off of hers, then looked around for a place to put her, where she'd be safe. He looked to his right and a light could be seen dancing above the water. He cocked up an eyebrow. What's that?" He asked no one. He tightened his grip on the girl. The light came closer and he swam back a little before a voice came into hearing range. "Let me go." There was a brief silence. "I don't care. My cousin is in there, Hinata." "That's it." Kiba looked at the girl again. "Your name's Hinata." He gazed at her frizzed up hair. It fell all over her face, and he smiled, admiring her beauty. He could hear the man calling her name. "Cousin, huh? Then he'll be able to take care of you," Kiba said, looking at Hinata's unconscious face. Neji was about to kill the sailors that were on the boat with him. They kept holding him down. Didn't they get it? His cousin could be dead. He had to go and at least try to save her. A splash in his face silenced everyone. They all looked, and there in the front of the boat, draped over the side, was Hinata's upper body. It took only a second for Neji to react. He pushed past the one sailor in front and grabbed his cousin's arms, pulling her whole body onto the small boat. He took some calming breath and checked Hinata over. He sighed when he didn't see any injuries, but then he noticed she was in her undergarment. He huddled her into his arms and glared at the sailors who were staring at the indecent girl. 2. Kiba sighed once he had helped the guy pull Hinata fully into the boat. He swam down a bit and looked up again at the small boat. He smiled, then recalled the whole thing and tuned bright red. "Oh my god!" he yelled, grabbing his head and shaking it. "I kissed her, twice, Then he paled and blushed an unbelievably dark shade of red. "I grabbed in between her," he trailed off. He pulled on his hair again, then looked down. 3. Huh? He noticed another figure. Iruka. He recognized the merman and swam over to help him. He looked around for a place where he could have Iruka and himself rest, then he saw how close the shore was. "Wow, I didn't know we were that close to shore." He shook his head, then pulled one of Iruka's arms around his shoulder and swam towards the shore. Naruto's body was flying around like a flag in the wind. He had a strong grip on the rails and squinted, his eyes shut. His right hand slipped off the railing and flung backwards, causing him to shift and hit the wooden outpost he was sitting on earlier. He winced in pain, then reached his hand up and went to grab the rails again. Sasuke had turned and was now clutching the rails for dear life. He had closed his eyes and wrapped both arms around the top of the rails. He felt a tug on his waist, and then he felt a piece of his pants and vest rip. Remembering his katana, he opened his eyes to see where it had gone. He looked down and saw his katana fall towards the ocean but stop. Only focusing on the katana, he noticed it collide against something tan and orange, also that a tan hand was holding it. Just as he was about to look at the owner of the hand, one of the rope connectors broke and swung around, hitting him in the back of the head, immediately knocking him out. Naruto squinted, his eyes open to see what he had grabbed. The katana. He recognized a weapon when he saw one. His left hand slipped a little, he re-gripped it and tried to pull himself closer to the rails, but the wind pushed him back. His hand was forced off the rail when something heavy landed on his back, pushing him down with it. Once in the water, he shook his head vigorously and flipped to see what landed on him. "Oh my god!" Naruto yelled, tensing up. The raven-haired human he liked was floating right next to him. He cautiously went over and poked him, then swam away a bit, accidentally dropping the katana but paying it no mind. "Oh my god! Oh my god!" Seeing no reaction, he swam over again and picked the human up. He checked to see if there was a change in his features. There wasn't. So he pulled the guy to the surface. The rain was still pouring when he resurfaced. A light was the only thing Naruto could really make out, but he ignored it and gazed at the raven. "What was your name?" Naruto thought aloud, studying the guy's face. "Sasuke." "We?" Naruto ignored the rest, thinking it was just some voice inside his head reminding him. "Yeah, that's it. Sasuke." He smiled at the unconscious guy. "Okay Sasuke, we got to get you to shore." He heaved Sasuke up a little more, then swam around looking for any sign of shore. The rain let up more as time passed. Naruto could see a lot better now. He finally found a small beach. Naruto threw Sasuke up onto the beach. He pulled himself out of the water, then heaved Sasuke up more. Now all of Sasuke's and his body were out of the water. He ruffled his hair trying to dry it off. He looked down at Sasuke. "Hey, you breathing?" Not expecting a response, he watched as Sasuke's chest rose and fell. He just sat there for a couple minutes watching Sasuke's chest. Naruto then breathed out some air and clapped his hands together. What to do now? He looked around as if an answer would come out to him. He rubbed his hands together. Yeah. He looked back at Sasuke, then the water, then the small clearing around them. Okay. He looked back at Sasuke. He is unconscious and he is really hot. Naruto grabbed his head and shook it, then banged his fists on his tail. Okay, he sighed. He looked back at Sasuke. One won't hurt, he convinced himself. He leaned over to Sasuke more and titled Sasuke's chin a little. Slowly he put his lips on Sasuke's. After a few seconds of holding that chaste kiss, he pried Sasuke's mouth open with his tongue. Then once he had opened Sasuke's mouth enough, he let his tongue roam the human's mouth. Oh my god, he tastes good. He closed his eyes savoring it, and he would have continued if not for. What are you, Druka yelled, getting his arm back from around Kiba's shoulder. Naruto immediately jumped off of Sasuke. Nothing, he yelled, beet red, hands gripping the sand. That, Iruka went to swim over to Naruto, forgetting he was on land, so he fell face first into the sand. Coughing, he continued to yell. That was nothing. Kiba just sat shocked, the only word coming to his head and out of his mouth. Wow. Sasuke woke up feeling dizzy. He hadn't opened his eyes yet, but he heard something. It's not that big of a deal, a voice yelled, sounded close. It's a very big deal. We're in so much trouble. I am in so much trouble, another voice yelled, close but not as close, and the other voice. Look, it's not a big deal, see. Sasuke's chin was being grabbed. What the? Sasuke thought, still dizzy. See, he's not even conscious. Sasuke finally spoke. His chin was in pain now. Then the one person gasped and dropped his head. Ow. He heard multiple yells and splashes as he opened his eyes. He sat up and was alone. What? He looked around. How did I get here? He looked around again, still finding no one. He tried to stand but collapsed back onto the ground. He winced in pain. Then he licked the inside of his mouth. What? He tasted something extra sweet, yet salty. He scrunched up his feature, then looked around again. Who was that? The hand, the voice, what happened? He just sat there pondering until he heard some more shouts coming from the surrounding area. Sasuke. It was Itachi, he could tell. Itachi was Sasuke's older brother. Sasuke, he called out again. Sasuke raised his head, not bothering to stand. Over here. After a short time, Itachi came into view along with some royal knights. Sasuke. He threw his arms around his little brother. Are you all right? Are you injured anywhere? Sasuke shook his head. Dizzy, but that's about it. Itachi nodded his head, and a couple of soldiers stepped forward, lifting Sasuke up and carrying him towards their castle. The three mermen stopped swimming and gave themselves some time to let their breath even out. Oh, my God, Iruka breathed out, clenching his heart. Kiba just allowed himself to float there, and Naruto wrapped his arms around himself. After a short silence, Kiba burst into laughter. Naruto and Iruka looked at him confused. Then Kiba whipped his head up and did a small flip, then swim right in front of Naruto. You made out with the dude. Naruto blushed a bit red, as Kiba did a backflip away from him and continued laughing. Kiba, that's enough, he was just giving CPR, right Naruto? Iruka swam closer to the two. What? Kiba pointed at Iruka. What about you? Up on the surface you kept yelling about it. Iruka turned slightly pale, remembering how unprofessional he acted, then shook his head. I was flustered back there, what with seeing our prince on you humans, you lips. Yeah, whatever, hypocrite. He mumbled out the last part. So Naruto, did you give him CPR or was it just for fun? He wiggled his eyebrows and elbowed his friend in the ribs. Shush, shut up. It's none of your business. Iruka's jaw dropped slightly. Kiba muffled a laugh. You did give him CPR? Iruka asked. Naruto? Well, Naruto fiddled with his hands. Kiba groaned and curled up, hoping it would help suppress. Naruto. You can't be serious. Kiba was in pure agony. He covered his mouth, trying so hard. You know what, I think we should go home now. Naruto swam as fast as he could, grabbing Kiba's wrist and swimming away from a very pissed off Iruka. Kiba laughed and laughed the whole way, commenting once or twice on how dead Naruto was. Naruto just continued swimming. He knew Iruka wouldn't tell his dad. Well, at least he hoped Iruka wouldn't. Naruto and Kiba swam right into Naruto's room once they returned home. It has to be done. Iruka swam forward, then stopped. Then again, it really won't change anything. He swam backwards. Yes it will. If I don't do this, Naruto may be in more trouble than he already is. He inhaled deeply, then swam forward. Your Highness. He squeezed out, seeing Yodem polishing his trident. Yeah, because we're not in enough trouble already. Naruto mocked as Kiba pulled him out of his bedroom window. Relax, you're going to love this. So shut up and be grateful. Kiba replied, still pulling Naruto. Why should I be grateful to you? Naruto huffed but continued swimming. You left me in my room right after we got back, leaving me alone there for hours. Kiba ignored Naruto's ranting and continued to pull him. After some swimming, they arrived at the cave Naruto kept all of his human things in. What are we doing here? Naruto questioned, stopping just in front of the makeshift door. Just come inside, Kiba said, exhausted with Naruto's questions. Naruto groaned but followed in. Tada! Kiba held up the twisted fabric that he had ripped off Hinata earlier and the katana Naruto had dropped. Naruto gasped and grabbed the katana away from Kiba. He felt the outer sheath and asked, where did you get this? Found it, I was looking for. He examined the dress. This, he stated, not knowing what it's called. And I saw that thing and remembered it being given to that guy you made out with. He nudged Naruto in the ribs again. Naruto blushed again and held the katana close to his chest, still sheathed. Shut up. Kiba just grinned and began fiddling with Hinata's dress. Naruto looked at the dress again. Looked closer, something clicked and a twinkle filled his eyes. Kiba, he started in his innocent tone, then coughed. Wasn't that girl you were staring at wearing that? Kiba paled. And no, he stuttered out, clutching the dress tighter. Yes, it was. Now Kiba, how would you know that it wasn't on her anymore? Naruto teased confidently. Kiba opened his mouth to defend himself, but Naruto kept asking and accusing him of all these things, so he just blurted out. I didn't mean to touch her there. I was in a hurry. She was going to die. I didn't mean anything by it, he yelled out. The dress swayed to and fro from being shaken around. Naruto backed up a bit, clutching the katana even more. What did you do? Kiba just shut his mouth tight and examined the oh-so-interesting sand. He mumbled out the rest and Naruto couldn't catch it. What? He asked, swimming forward. Naruto's jaw was hanging open and the katana was held loose in his left hand. Then he screamed in Kiba's face. Oh, and you made fun of me. At least I didn't grab a girl's boob. I told you I didn't mean to. I had to get the dress off of her or she'd die. Kiba screamed back. I didn't mean to grab her there. You, on the other hand, intentionally kissed him. Naruto went to retort but was interrupted by a blast destroying one of his human collectibles. Both Kiba and Naruto watched the pieces then turned with angry faces to see who destroyed it. Both dropped their items once they saw who it was. "D-Dad." Naruto spoke. Kiba just floated in place too scared to move. "We're dead," Kiba thought. Iruka stood off to the right, sort of behind Yodem. He looked at them guilty then dropped his head down. Yodem took in a deep breath lowering his trident a bit. "Naruto, Kiba, I have told you time after time to stay away from humans and anything related to them." He glared at the two frozen mermen. "Since talking doesn't seem to get through to you, then this will." He shot at all of the human things. Some of the trident's power shot right past their faces. Scared they swam away to hide. Naruto and Kiba watched all the things they had gathered together throughout the years get destroyed. Kiba stared at the ball of fabric. Just as a bolt of the trident's power hit it, destroying it instantly. Naruto saw the devastated look on his friend's face then turned just in time to see the katana shatter into pieces. Naruto sported the same face Kiba did as he watched the pieces fall into the sand. Once Yodem was done he turned towards the two mermen. "Helping humans?" he yelled, making the two flinch and look at him. "Why would you help those beasts? They deserve nothing but death." "But they would have died," Kiba retorted in his mind, convincing himself it was the right thing to do. In truth, Kiba was always scared of humans and any human belonging. The surface scared him, and if he wasn't such good friends with Naruto he would have never even thought about going up there. 1. If he hadn't seen that girl, that human girl, if he never met her, he would still be scared of the surface, of humans, and of human possessions. But now, like Naruto, he's fascinated by them and he wants to collect more, hoping to understand more about them. That's why he stashed the stuff here. He could have studied all the things over like Naruto did every time they came here. "No more. Naruto, you are to stay in your room and you are never to leave the palace. Is that clear?" Yodem yelled. Not having the courage to do anything more, he weakly nodded his head, hiding his face. Yodem exhaled then turned to Iruka. "You take them home." Iruka nodded and bowed. Then Yodem left the cave and the three mermen alone. There was a long moment of silence. Kiba lowered himself so that he could see Naruto's face. "Hey," he tried to comfort Naruto, but Naruto just turned his face away again. Kiba looked at him for a long time before turning to Iruka. Acting on impulse alone, he grabbed the elder merman's arm and dragged him out of the cave. Iruka pulled his arm back. He started calmly. "Why did you tell him? What does this do?" He was cut off by Iruka yelling. "He's out of control, Kiba." Kiba quieted down, still pissed off. Iruka calmed down then continued. "He's the prince. He, above all mermen or mermaids, should abide by the laws of the sea. The other merfolk already have reason to dislike him." Kiba went to retort, but again Iruka cut him off. "Whether whose fault that is not the point. The point is that he should abide by the rules and follow every code to win over the other's doubts. And frankly, him dragging you into all of this human stuff is very undignified. As a prince he should." "Shut up," Kiba yelled, fisting his hands. "Naruto has learned that no matter what he does it's not going to change the other's opinion. Do you honestly think that if he follows all the rules and acts like one of the guard dolphins their opinions will just change? This was his escape from everything. All those stupid merfolk." He pointed towards the direction of their village, tearing up slightly. "What's locking him up in some stupid palace going to do?" Iruka didn't say anything. "Do you think we'll get to see each other again?" Again no answer. "Of course not. Because Yodem has this idea in his head that Naruto is the one to blame. That, as you said, he's to blame for dragging us into this." "Well, I'm glad he did. I would have never seen that girl if he didn't, and I would have never had so much fun in my life." He threw up his hands, smiling like a maniac. "All the thrills, the danger, that was fun, it was the best. The scariest but the best," he added mentally. "And now the most fun I'll ever have is just watching the palace, or just to imagine that girl's face. Because whoever you want to blame for this, Naruto or me, but the thing is I love that human girl." Iruka's eyes widened. "Are you crazy? She's a human, you're a merman." Kiba crossed his arms. "I don't care." They were interrupted when the door to the cave opened up. While Iruka and Kiba were fighting, let's see what Naruto was doing. Naruto looked up and saw the stream of bubbles slowly rise up and out of the cave's small holes. He was crying, but that was obvious. He curled himself up into a tight ball and floated in the middle of the water and continued to cry. Oh, poor Naruto-kun. Naruto spun out of his ball and turned towards where he heard the mystery voice come from. I'm sorry, Naruto-kun. This must have really hurt you. The figure slithered out of the darkness. A silver-haired merman was floating towards him. He had an eel tail and both his eyes flashed yellow for a moment before turning back to normal. Once he got completely out of the dark, Naruto saw that the reason his eyes flashed yellow was because of something he wore over his eyes. Glasses. Who are you? Naruto asked, wiping away any remains of his tears. The merman smiled, then swam over Naruto's head, ruffling his hair while over him. Then he swam over next to Naruto. My name is Kabuto, Naruto-kun. Kabuto explained, then wrapped his tail around Naruto's. Naruto blushed from the contact and tried to wiggle his tail out of Kabuto's hold. Relax, Naruto-kun. I mean you no harm. I was just swimming by when I overheard the king yelling, so I stopped, and well, let's just say that now I'm aware of your little predicament. He whispered the last word into Naruto's ear, then he swam over Naruto again and then. You know, Naruto-kun, I know someone who can help you, someone very powerful and well known. Kabuto explained, swimming around the cave. Naruto stared at him, half scared, the other half wanting to know more. You know of Orochimaru, right, Naruto-kun? Kabuto asked, floating right in front of Naruto. Naruto's back away and gulped audibly. Oh, Orochimaru, the sea snake? Yes, he can make everything better for you, Naruto-kun. All you have to do is follow me. He swam to the door, not opening it yet, but standing by it. Naruto looked around his cave, remembering what just occurred, but he shook his head, dismissing those thoughts. He turned to Kabuto. No. He looked back at where he could see pieces of the katana, and sighed sorrowfully. Just go away. Kabuto bowed his head. His eyes flashed yellow again thanks to his glasses. He creaked open the door a little. Do you think we'll get to see each other again? Of course not. Naruto turned to the door after hearing Kiba's voice. Kabuto smirked but quickly hid it and closed the door again. After some silence he began. Oh, Naruto-kun. Looks like you lost your freedom, your friend, and... He picked up what was a piece of the sheath and handed it to Naruto. Your love. Naruto examined the piece in his hands, and frowned. Kabuto's eyes again flashed yellow and he smiled wickedly. Well, I'll be off. Kabuto swam to the door slowly. Wait. Naruto shouted, reaching out his hand. Kabuto spun around, instantly releasing his hold on the makeshift door. Yes? He drawled out. Naruto bowed his head. Could you take me to Orochimaru? Kabuto smiled and wrapped an arm around him. Of course, Naruto-kun. Then they left. Okay, same time again. The cave's makeshift door opened and Kabuto swam out with Naruto following closely behind. Naruto? Kiba asked, swimming over to his friend. Hey bud. He looked at the back of Kabuto's head. Why are you following him? Naruto didn't turn his head or answer, he just continued swimming. Kiba looked back at Iruka, who finally got his tail moving and was swimming up behind them. Naruto, what do you think you are doing? He asked, finally catching up to the three. Relax, Iruka-san. Kabuto interjected, turning his head so that he could glance at the merman. We are merely going to see Orochimaru. What? Kiba and Iruka yelled. Both just floated in place as the other two continued to swim. Naruto, you. Iruka began. Why don't you go tell my dad? You're good at that. Naruto spat back, then swam forward even faster. Kiba watched the other two swim away for a bit before Iruka yelled and pushed him in the back in order to get him moving. Come on. And they swam after the two. Come on, Naruto-kun, this way. Kabuto motioned in towards the skeleton of a sea serpent. Naruto gulped but went in, slowly after Kabuto, eyeing all the weird things floating and growing around the cave. Then he stopped and tried to focus on the voice he heard coming from deeper in the cave. Come in. It hissed. Come in. Naruto swam more, then stopped just before some seaweed hanging down from the ceiling. He peered in more and saw Kabuto floating by a small conch bed. Don't dilly-dally, boy. One might question your upbringing. A figure dropped out of the conch bed. He had earrings, tattoos, and his eyes resembled snakes. His tail was a snake tail. A long sand of that thing. Naruto questioned himself, slowly allowing himself to swim further in. Then Naruto got pushed fully in and was now right next to the feared sea snake. He tensed and saw Orochimaru's tail was wrapped around him. There, Orochimaru purred, swimming over to a chair and pulling Naruto along. Now I understand that you. He flicked a piece of Naruto's hair with the tip of his tail. Naruto flinched and whipped towards the tail, causing Orochimaru to chuckle at how nervous and jumpy the blonde was. Have a problem? Several actually. He smiled, then waved to Kabuto, who swam off, but Naruto's attention was brought back to Orochimaru as he began again. I have ways of making everything better for you, Naruto. Kabuto returned with some bottle. Orochimaru stood up and swam over to what looked like a mixing stand. Naruto, not knowing what else to do, followed him over there. Now you, Naruto. Iruka yelled, swimming right next to the blonde merman, Kiba following, floating right behind Iruka. Ah, Iruka, Kiba, would you like me to help you also? They didn't answer but continued to glare at the merman. Dude, let's go. Do you see this guy? Kiba was interrupted by Orochimaru. Allow me to show you what I can do for you. Kabuto poured some heavy liquid into the pot. Now this is what I will do for you three. Orochimaru began. I will turn you three into humans for 3 days. Today will not count, of course. The countdown starts tomorrow morning. A picture of all 3 of them as humans appeared. Now by the time the sun sets on the 3rd day, you have to get your human partner to fall in love with. By love I mean they have to kiss you. And if one of you don't succeed, you all fail. A picture of each of them kissing some shadowy figure appeared. I don't have a human partner, Iruka yelled, wanting to leave. The human you saved, Iruka-san. Kabuto explained, and a picture of Kakashi appeared in front of them. Kiba and Naruto's heads turned so fast towards Iruka, glaring. No words were shared, but Iruka knew what they wanted to say. Now if you fail, you will belong to me. Orochimaru smiled evilly and all 3 mermen's eyes widened. No deal. Naruto yelled, summoning up his courage. Not so fast, Naruto-kun. Kabuto stated quickly. He fixed his glasses and crossed his arms. If you leave now, that will qualify as losing, so you would belong to Orochimaru. All 3 mermen's eyes widened again. Have we got a deal? Orochimaru asked. Hold on. Kiba yelled, waving his hands up. What if we don't fail? Orochimaru grimaced but answered. You will remain human permanently. It's a lose-lose situation. Iruka thought, jawing slacking a bit. So, he drawled out again. Deal? Naruto stared at his friend and teacher. Kiba smiled nervously. Iruka sighed but gestured to accept. Naruto inhaled deeply, then grabbed the sea snake's hand. Kiba and Iruka did the same. Then a piece of paper Kabuto was holding unraveled and their names were on it, in their handwriting too. They stared at it, shocked. But Orochimaru again drew their attention back to them when he pulled Naruto away from the other 2. You will each give me something as payment, he stated after lining all 3 of them up. As for what you will pay, I'll just take what I want, he smiled wickedly. Naruto opened his mouth to yell but found some weird giant bubble encircle him. Iruka and Kiba were in the same situation and they all thrashed about trying to break free. Naruto then looked down to see his orange tail separating and 2 tan legs forming from them. The bubble burst and Naruto blacked out. Oh my head, Iruka complained, then opened his eyes to darkness. He sat up trying to calm down. Naruto, Kiba. Right here, Kiba shouted. About time you woke up. Man, look, I got legs. He smiled excited, overly happy. Kiba splashed around in the water, and then attempted to stand but failed and fell into the water. He groaned in pain as Iruka asked, Kiba, are we in dark place? No. Why? Kiba answered, getting comfortable and playing with his new toes. Because I can't see anything. I can hear you and I can feel. He picked up some sand and let it run through his fingers. Dry sand. He chalked out, feeling that he also had 2 human legs. What, are you kidding? You can't see. Here, look at me. Kiba scouted over towards him more. Kiba looked into Iruka's eyes and sure enough he had gone blind. Wow, so that Orochimaru took your sight. Well, that sucks, Kiba yelled. What about you? Are you okay? Kiba patted himself down. Yeah, wait, am I the only normal one? Kiba crossed his arms. Huh? Wait, Naruto. Where is he? Is he alright? Iruka stood up panicking. Surprisingly, Iruka could stand just fine and even took a couple steps. He fell but got back up and seemed fine at it. Kiba stood up to swaying slightly, still not good at walking or standing. Relax Iruka, he's with Pakun. Kiba grabbed the older Mon's arm. Pakun? Iruka echoed. He's a dog, some human pet that helps me in Naruto with finding out what human items are and what they do. He's going to help us, Kiba explained, gripping Iruka's arm more for balance. Well, how is Naruto, is he okay? Iruka asked, calming down. Yeah, but Orochimaru took his voice. What? Iruka yelled in Kiba's ear, not intentionally. Ow! Kiba yelled back. I hate to break this up, you two. Kiba looked at Pakun, who was sitting next to Naruto, who was already walking around like a pro. But you all need clothes. Clothes? Iruka and Kiba echoed. Naruto mouthed the word but no sound came out. Yes, because, currently you're all naked. Kiba and Naruto looked at each other and Iruka confused. What's wrong with how we look? Kiba asked, being the only one able to see and talk. No way. Sasuke yelled at his brother. They were casually walking down the sandy shore when Itachi started asking about how Sasuke survived. Sasuke told him everything, and now Itachi was telling Sasuke that it'd be only fair that he should wed the person who saved him. It's the fair thing to do, therefore you must do it, Itachi stated, emotionless. Sasuke growled, hating how he always has to do the right and fair thing, but thus is the life of a prince. Sasuke looked out at the ocean. An idea struck him and he walked ahead of Itachi and turned around, walking backwards facing his brother. Itachi lifted an eyebrow at his little brother's actions. Sasuke smirked at him. How about a small game, Itachi? He tilted his head a little, still walking backwards. If you can catch me before we get. He looked over his shoulder and saw a rather good-sized sand dune far enough away. To that sand dune, then I'll stop fussing over this trivial matter. And if you win? Itachi asked, not really showing interest because he knew he was faster than Sasuke. Then we won't even try to find the person who saved me and forget this whole event. Sasuke turned and went off into a sprint. Begin, he yelled back. Itachi didn't even flinch, he just took off in a dead sprint. He let a small smile grace his lips. It was nice to see that his brother could still act childish. This would be good to use as blackmail if, when needed. Man, this whole feet thing would be easier if I didn't have this on, Naruto said, even though no sound came out. Oh yeah, no can hear me. He stared at Iruka and Kiba. Kiba was currently trying to help Iruka get the white thing on, his was already on. He looked down at himself again. The white fabric Pakun had brought over to them was uncomfortable to say the least. It was heavy and constricted body movements. Why did they need these again? This is stupid. I don't even know where to find Sasuke. Orochimaru could have at least delivered us right to him. Naruto groaned, swirling his head. Cheap ball. Naruto was knocked out of his thoughts when something collided with his back. He tumbled onto the ground, which isn't as nice as tumbling in the water. Kiba and Iruka heard an oomph and looked up to where Naruto should be standing, but instead he was on the floor with a guy on top of him. Kiba looked at them, then after a couple of seconds he screamed and went to and fell face first into the sand. Kiba! Kiba! Naruto! What's going on? Iruka asked, outstretching his arms, trying to feel for anyone. Naruto moved his arms to pry himself up, somewhat resembling a seal's way of standing. He shook his head, getting what sand he could out. The weight on his back got off, allowing Naruto to turn around over and sit down. Naruto arranged his legs in front of him, being used to that position when he had his tail. Sasuke sat down with his knees in front of him. He shook his head, then grabbed it and tried to brush any excess sand off. After that, he looked in front of him, ready to apologize for running into the person. Yet when he locked eyes with Naruto, he couldn't help but give a weird face, lifting up one eyebrow and squinting his one eye. Naruto had the most odd look on his face. He was leaning forward and had gripped the white fabric. His jaw was wide open and his eyes were almost popping out of his socket. "HN, what are you staring at?" Sasuke asked in an ignorant tone. It wasn't uncommon to see Prince Sasuke. He and Kakashi usually went out a lot, so everyone in his kingdom knew his face and attitude. Naruto started jumping slightly and waved his hands up and down, not knowing that this allowed Sasuke to see a little bit of his upper thighs. "It's you. Wow, and here I was complaining that The sea snake gave crappy serviceman. But here you are, wow. Sasuke watched Naruto as the blonde pointed at him, then pointed to the ocean while bobbed his head up and down, and then he pointed back at him and finally let his arms fall to his sides, giving him a huge smile. All the while the guy's mouth was moving but no sound came out. Sasuke was lost for words. What is this guy? What's going on? Sasuke began, standing up. You can't talk, Naruto, you have no voice. Sasuke looked around, then spotted a man with brown hair and 2 red tattoos on his face. The guy was struggling to get to his feet, and then there was another man who looked confused and was waving his hands around, like he was feeling for something. By the ponytail man's feet was a dog just sitting there naturally. The most unnatural thing that all 3 of these men shared was that they were all wearing parts of a mast. Did you 3 wash up from a shipwreck? Itachi asked. He was watching the whole time but chose now to intervene. Itachi looked Sasuke up and down, then threw him back his shoe, smirking. Sasuke glared at his brother, then put his shoe back on, glancing at the blonde who was still smiling at him. Sasuke scoffed at him. What kind of idiot doesn't remember their mute? Dobi. Naruto stopped smiling, letting the insult sink in. Hey, I just recently lost my voice, so I have an excuse, jerk, Naruto yelled again, standing up. He folded his hands over his chest and glared at the gorgeous human. Sasuke smirked, folding his own arms over his chest. I can't hear you, you're mute, Dobi. Sasuke's smirk grew as he explained this to Naruto slowly, teasingly. Itachi glanced back at his brother. Arguing with a mute person, that's new. Could you argue with a mute person? Well, apparently Sasuke could. Allow us to help you. Itachi gestured towards himself and Sasuke. Kiba had gotten to his feet and allowed himself some time to balance out, then he looked back up at Itachi. Yeah, actually that would be very helpful. Kiba gestured to Iruka. That's Iruka, he's blind. I assumed as much. Itachi replied, then grabbed Iruka's hand, causing his to yelp. My name is Prince Itachi and my little brother, Prince Sasuke, and I would be happy to escort you and your fellow companions back to our castle. With you being the oldest of the 3, I'd have to make sure it would be alright, is it? You're a human, of course it's not alright. This is all wrong. Iruka panicked in his head. It's fine. My name, as Kiba had said, is Iruka, and the blow mute one. He quickly corrected himself, is called Naruto. Itachi shook Iruka's hand, then kept holding onto it. It's delightful to meet all of you. Now if you'll allow me to lead you, we'll be off. Kiba took a couple of cautious steps, then started to get the hang of it and went to catch up to Iruka and Itachi. Itachi was leading Iruka and Pakun walked besides Kiba. Naruto was walking next to Sasuke, pouting. Sasuke smirked down to the blonde. They had a ways to walk, not too far but not too close, so Sasuke, being bored, decided to tease the mysterious blonde man. So Dobi, Naruto snapped his head up to Sasuke, glaring at him. How old are you? 18. Naruto answered, then slapped his face. He walked right into that one. Sasuke laughed a little at how easy it was to show the blonde's stupidity. Let's try using our fingers. Sasuke held up his fingers and wiggled them, smirking. Naruto stuck his tongue out at Sasuke and faked wiggling his fingers. He stopped wiggling them and held up. 10. 10 years old, what a big boy. Sasuke grabbed Naruto's cheek. Naruto swatted the hand away, blushing. Then grabbed Sasuke's hand and forced up 8 fingers. Sasuke watched Naruto force his fingers up. He didn't care. Itachi and the rest of them were way ahead of them since they had stopped. Once Naruto had 8 of Sasuke's fingers up, he held up all of his fingers. 18, huh? Same as me. Sasuke then used the hand he held 8 fingers up with and grabbed onto one of Naruto's hands. Come on, Dobi. He pulled Naruto along, breaking into a sprint. Naruto blushed and kept staring at their hands. He's holding my hand. He's holding my hand. He's holding my hand. He kept repeating, smiling and blushing, not taking his eyes off their interlocked fingers. Naruto, Iruka and Kiba were handed over to Tenten once they arrived at the palace. Tenten was the head of security and she made sure everything was running smoothly in the palace. She wore navy blue boots and a white vest with black pants. She had her hair up in 2 buns. You boys will join their majesties in this dining hall after you all have bathed and changed. Tenten instructed, gesturing to the room off to their left. Naruto and Kiba looked inside the room admiring all its fine works of art. Iruka was holding Tenten's hand as to not get lost. She led the boys into one of their grand guest rooms. She let go of Iruka's hand after they all walked inside. Shikamaru will come around for you. She examined what the guys were wearing. Clothes, she said waveringly. Pakun had walked in with them and was now helping them get the fabric off. What was the point in wearing that if we just take it off? Kiba asked once he freed himself of the mast. Pakun just rolled his dog eyes at Kiba and presumed to help Iruka. Shikamaru came to the door then knocked 3 times. Come in, Iruka said after finally freeing himself of the piece of mast. Shikamaru walked in. Oh my god, he covered his eyes. What? Kiba asked confused. Why are you all naked? Shikamaru yelled, still covering his eyes. Miss Tenten told us to take it off, Iruka said innocently. Did your brains float away while you were out at sea? Get into the tub, please. The 3 looked at each other. Well, Iruka looked around in a general area. They all shrugged. Naruto and Kiba saw a huge shell-like tub. They walked over to it, and then Naruto walked back and grabbed Iruka's hand, leading him to it. Is this it? Kiba asked, popping a bubble. Shikamaru took his hand off and nodded. The 3 got into the tub slowly. Troublesome, Shikamaru muttered while picking up their clothes. Huh. This is fun. Naruto kicked his legs, splashing Kiba and Iruka. Pakun was about to jump into the tub when Shikamaru grabbed him by some loose fur in the back of his neck. Hey, what are you doing? Kiba asked, as he saw Shikamaru leave with Pakun and their clothes. Kakashi also has some dogs, so I'm going to go put yours with them. He'll be fine. Kakashi's dogs are all pushovers. Unless Kakashi orders them to attack. He added silently. Put those undergarments on once you get out. He pointed towards the bed. 3 pairs were lined up in size order. With that he left. Kiba shrugged as Naruto splashed him again. Thank you for Aussie bowing. Shino and Choji just nodded, then grabbed their materials and left. Now all of them were fully dressed in human clothes. Kiba wore a dark red vest with a lighter red shirt underneath, black pants and of course black boots. Iruka wore something similar to Neji's outfit. It was a white shirt with a tint of blue in it, then a dark blue vest over it, accompanied by dark blue pants and navy blue boots. Naruto wore a black shirt that turned white near the ends of the sleeves, black pants with some white dots sewn in, and like Kiba, black boots. Now remember, we have to remain calm. We'll walk into the dining hall as if we were walking into the dining hall we have under the sea. Understood? Iruka said. Yeah, we Naruto. Kiba half agreed. Come back here. Naruto had run out of the room, too eager to wait for Iruka to finish. Iruka listened and could tell that Kiba had left as well. Iruka sighed. Great. He spat sarcastically. He walked down the hallway trying to hear for Kiba, or Naruto running, or just anybody he could ask for help. Finally a sound hit Iruka's ears and he walked over towards it with his arms outstarched, making sure not to bump into anything. He found a door and held his right hand on it. Parmesan cheese. That is it. A voice rang. Iruka scrunched up his face, confused. What's Parmesan cheese? Now what does this say to do? Ah, here we go. Some clanging and was heard, then the man yelled out. 2 pounds of dolphin sprinkled with salt. Iruka's face paled. Fin. Then we add pepper and lemon juice, just a dab. Then we broil them for 10 minutes. Iruka was now leaning on the door. Broil, sprinkle with parmesan, and then we have their dinner, Guy announced once he had put the dolphin into the oven. He turned and saw Iruka leaning against the door and looking awfully pale. Hello there, my not-so-youthful visitor. Why do you look so pale? He asked, giving him the good guy pose. Iruka opened his eyes, notifying Guy that he was blind. Oh. Guy dropped the pose but kept smiling. Don't let being blind get you down. Here, allow me to give you the hug of youth. Guy went towards Iruka. That's okay. Iruka yelled, standing straight. Come now. Guy called again and went to hug Iruka, but Iruka ducked on instinct and ran into the kitchen. Really, it's okay. He rushed as Guy kept chasing him. 10-10. What is Chef Guy making us tonight? Itachi asked. Oh, you're all going to love it. It's a new recipe he found, Don and Susan Shaw's royal dolphin. Kiba and Naruto stared at each other from across the table, both paling. Thinking of how Iruka would take it when he found out the animals he trained were being cooked and eaten. The both gulped audibly and slumped into their chairs. Crap. Naruto sat next to Sasuke, who sat next to Itachi. Kiba sat next to Neji, who sat next to Hinata, who sat across from Itachi. Both the Hinatas and Sasuke's parents couldn't make dinner because they had gone off to some royal gathering. Where is the other G guest? Hinata asked. Kiba smiled at her, loosing his train of thought by just looking at her. They all looked at Kiba because Naruto couldn't give them an answer, but all Kiba did was look at Hinata. Naruto kicked him under the table to get him out of his gaze. What? Kiba snapped at Naruto. Where's your other companion? Neji asked, not looking too happy. Oh, I don't know. Kiba explained slowly. Sasuke opened his mouth to say something, but a series of crashes stopped him. They all fell silent and looked towards the door. Ten smiled while walking backwards. I think I should go check on what Guy is doing. She smiled, then turned around with a determined face and marched off as more crashes rang through the air. Come and receive your youthful hug, Guy yelled, running around the kitchen. You stay away from me, dolphin killer, Iruka ordered, then collided into something. The thing Iruka collided into grabbed his arms and hoisted him so that he was standing straight up. Guy, stop pestering the guest, came the voice of the person who was holding Iruka. Guy stopped in his tracks and glared Kakashi down. Kakashi, my rival, what are you doing here, walking? He stated, bored. Coming to gaze at my amazing Guy, another voice yelled. Miss Ten. Iruka recognized her voice. So this man holding me must be Kakashi. So then Guy is the man who was cooking dolphins. What are you doing? Kakashi could have sworn he saw flames coming out of her mouth. I was just, Guy tried to explain. Where's the food? Ten yelled again. It's true that Ten is younger than Guy, but she was higher ranked than he was, so he had to listen to her every order. A ding caught everyone's attention and Guy jumped over the fallen shelves and pulled the dolphin out, adding the finishing touches and putting everything onto a plate to serve. I'm sorry about that, he's just a little over-energized, Kakashi explained, pulling Iruka out of the kitchen. Iruka straightened himself up as much he could. As Iruka felt around, making sure his shirt was tucked in and looking presentable, Kakashi was examining him. Brown hair in a ponytail, and a scar across his nose. Kakashi reached up and felt his eye patch. Did you? He began. Iruka looked up to him. Are you okay? Ten barged in. Iruka and Kakashi looked at her. She covered her mouth, then apologized. Oh, I'm sorry, was I interrupting? Kakashi shook his head, smiling. Ten smiled, then turned back to Guy and grabbed the platters that held all the food. She then turned on her heels towards the dining hall. Kakashi grabbed Iruka's hand. May I escort you? Kakashi asked, raising Iruka's hand. Why, yes. Iruka stuttered. This is ridiculous. I mean, I'm handsome, strong and much more mature than Naruto, so why am I sitting so far from Hinata? Kiba thought, glancing around the table. Across from Kiba was Sasuke and Naruto bickering, and that human prince had a smirk on his face, meaning he was just enjoying how flustered Naruto could get. Then besides Kiba was Iruka and Kakashi, who were making nice conversation. Finally there was him, too far to talk properly to Hinata and just bored out of his mind watching the other lovebirds. Okay. Here is your dinner, Ten announced, stopping all small talk so that she could present their meal. Iruka refused, saying he wasn't hungry. My poor dolphins, murders, he thought. Kakashi also declined. While the rest of them took their food and began to eat. Naruto gulped, then took a bite of it. Maybe I'll just eat the stuff around it. He peered at the green things and sliced bits of orange that were scattered around the green. There was a plop of white stuff with some brown pieces scattered on top of it too. Never mind. Kiba chewed on the dolphin, then slowed down and swished it around in his mouth. He swallowed it and sat there glancing around the room as if waiting for something to happen. Then he decided to try something else on his plate. He picked up some of the white stuff. Again he swished it around in his mouth and kept it there. He swallowed it again, then backed up his chair a bit. Something wrong? Ten asked from behind him. Yeah, is this food? I mean, is there something wrong with it? He asked, gesturing towards the dish. Everyone at the table looked at him weirdly, as Ten picked up a piece of dolphin and chewed on it. She turned her head side to side. Know why? Do you not like the taste of it? Something like that, Kiba said, racking a hand through his hair. Could I have something sweet, please? Oh sure. Ten smiled. She reached onto the table and grabbed the honey. Here you are. Thanks. Kiba poured it onto his spoon, then sucked on it. Ten placed the honey back in its place. Then the whole table gave Kiba the weirdest looks, minus Iruka, who had no idea what was going on. Once Kiba robbed the spoon of all its honey, he calmly stood up and grabbed Iruka's arm, hoisting him up. Excuse us, Naruto? Kiba gestured for Naruto to follow, which he did. The others just watched as they left the room, then began eating again. The three walked a ways downward, completely out of sight from anyone. Kiba, is something wrong? Are you okay? Iruka asked, worried for his one charge. Kiba's mouth was gaped open, then he yelled, throwing his hands in the air. I can't taste anything. Naruto and Iruka's jaws slacked. What? They yelled, mouthed. I can't taste anything, it feels like nothing's in my mouth at all. Are you kidding? Why couldn't I have lost my taste? This is retarded. I lose my voice and all you lose is your taste buds. Naruto continued to silently fume. Are you sure? You can't taste anything at all? Iruka asked. Nothing. If I didn't feel the food going down my throat or swerve around in my mouth, I swear I wouldn't even be able to tell I was eating anything. Kiba stated. Naruto stomped up his face and pointed a venomous finger in his face, then mouthed some words and pouted. Alright, calm down. Iruka tried. Naruto jumped right in front of Kiba's face again. Oh, quit being a baby. I lost my voice and I'm kind of okay with it. All you lost was your taste. Kiba had figured out some of the words Naruto had mouthed but didn't catch all of it. Just go along with it, we act like nothing's wrong with you, Iruka explained. Both boys nodded, and Kiba led Iruka back into the dining hall. They re-entered and everyone fell silent again. Why did you all just leave like that? Itachi asked. Nothing, just a small meeting. Kiba lied. They sat back down and began to eat again. Kakashi kept staring at Iruka intently. How? It has to be him, but how? Kakashi asked himself, still studying Iruka. An idea hit him and he leaned forward over the table a bit. Hinata. She turned to him and put down her silverware. What was that story the sailor told you? Oh, not that. Neji said, wiping his mouth. Sasuke rolled his eyes and leaned back in his chair. Mer people, ridiculous. Itachi and the rest of them looked at Hinata for an answer. She blushed from all the stares and forced herself not to lower her head. She tapped her fingers together nervously, then in a meek voice began. The man had told me about mer people and why humans and mer people don't make contact anymore. Kiba, Iruka and Naruto paled, their skin somewhat resembling Sasuke's and Itachi's. Kakashi noticed this and his one eye widened a fraction, but he gestured Hinata to continue. Hinata summoned up all her courage and continued. The man said there was a time when humans and merfolk didn't have a problem helping and talking to one another. But then one day a merman got caught by some humans. Now the people that had caught him were scientists. She took a calming breath, then continued. What happened after the men had caught the merman wasn't known. But the sailor said his boat had come right by the scientist's boat. And they saw the men push the merman back into the water. Well then, no harm, right? They must have been helping the man, Itachi stated, trying to understand. No, what happened after that was what shocked everyone. She took in another breath. The scientists waved for the other boat to come closer. So they headed towards the scientist's boat, but they were stopped. She put her hands up, showing the stop sign with the ocean water stopped flowing. Then after a minute it became very rough, and then from under the water a bolt of what looked like lightning struck the boat, instantly setting it on fire, exploding it into millions of pieces. She moved her hands to like how something would explode. Itachi, Kakashi, and even Neji and Sasuke, who had showed some interest in the story, looked slightly shocked. Kiba and Iruka looked mad, while Naruto just shadowed his face with his hair. And then a merman appeared out of the water and blew off the end of the sailor's ship. They all escaped using the lifeboats, but ever since then humans and mer people never saw nor tried to make contact to one another. She finished, blushing and bowing her head. Wow, such an elaborate tale. Itachi spoke, relaxing into this chair. Rubbish, merfolk. What a joke. Neji sneered. I agree. Ten stated, picking up Itachi's plate. Even if they did exist, the tale you just told, if that is true, then they must be brutal creatures, Sasuke said flatly. Naruto sat up from his seat and walked out of the room. Kiba got up and bowed a little, then grabbed Iruka's arm again. Another meeting, excuse us. Everyone rose an eyebrow, minus Kakashi, who was moving his eye back and forth deciphering his puzzle. Then his one eye widened and he threw his stare towards the door and tilted his head to the side in confusion. The two caught up to Naruto as he was fuming and complaining, throwing his arms all around. Be lying, vile creatures. I can't believe I took any interest in them at all. They don't even know what happened. He pointed to himself, then Kiba and Iruka. We're the brutal creatures. We've never experimented on a human like how they experimented on me. They don't even know what happened. Iruka nudged Kiba to get a clue on what was happening. He's fuming. Kiba whispered. Iruka nodded, then they waited for the Prince of the Sea to calm down. Once Naruto was panting from his mute rant, Iruka spoke up. I know this isn't the time, but I told you. Humans are evil creatures, it's in their nature. Now I'm sure you see why your father is so protective of you and why so many merpeople detest humans. Okay. That's it, Kiba hollered, then grabbed Naruto's collar and hoisted him up a bit. Get over it. So they got the story confused. Big deal. We'll straighten it out later. But I will not allow you to quit on this whole human thing. You got me addicted to this stuff, so there is no way I'm letting you quit on me now. Kiba dropped Naruto and then grabbed Iruka's collar and pointed a finger in front of Iruka's face. And you? Drop the human hate red, okay? 'Cause guess what, you are one. He stepped back from the two and straightened out his shirt. I will not be the only one participating in this deal. Alright? Get over it, deal with it, now let's go back to dinner. Kiba huffed, then stormed back to the door leading into the dining hall. Naruto and Iruka stood there in shock for a moment before Naruto began to lead Iruka back in as well. By the time the other two came back into the dining hall, Kiba was already in his seat and eating what was left of his dolphin. Didn't matter to him if it was a dolphin once, he was hungry and frustrated. They sat down and Kakashi smiled at Iruka and began to ask him questions about himself. So Iruka, what's your favorite food? Kakashi asked little questions like that and Iruka would answer them until they had gotten into a calm conversation. Naruto was still kind of miffed at how humans were twisting his story. He sighed, leaning his face onto his one hand. Oh well, I'll just straighten this whole thing out later, or I'll get Kiba to do it, depends if I get my voice back. Hey wait, do I get my voice back? I mean, I know it was payment, but he couldn't have taken it away forever, right? Kiba pushed his plate away, stuffed. Thank you, Ten, Itachi stated after Ten had handed him an information scroll. Oh, well this won't do. Everyone, minus Iruka and Kakashi, looked over to Itachi. Neji read this scroll over. What do you think? Itachi handed Neji the scroll. Kiba and Naruto looked at each other and locked eyes when they heard the word, scroll. Sasuke rolled his eyes at whatever his brother was talking about, and chose to look at Naruto. Hey Dobi, you haven't touched your food. Sasuke pointed out. He gestured to all the food on the plate. Look, you took maybe 1 or 2 bites out of your potatoes and you haven't touched the salad. Wait a minute. Kiba said, glancing at Naruto then back at Sasuke. This white stuff is potatoes? Sasuke gave him a dumbfounded stare. Yes, he said, then rolled his eyes. Naruto smiled at Kiba. Without thinking, Kiba took a spoonful of his leftover potatoes and flung it at the scroll. Unfortunately, he missed. But some did get onto the scroll, but most of it got on Neji. I want to sit by Hinata. Kiba squinted, his eyes shut, hoping would work. Neji blinked with his mouth gaping like a fish. Hinata covered her mouth to suppress a laugh. Sasuke just stared dumbfoundedly, again at Neji. Itachi looked amused. Ten gasped and waited for Neji's reaction. Kakashi looked confused. He was leaning over the table to see what had happened. Why did you throw potatoes at me? Neji asked, not focusing on Kiba. Kiba opened his eyes and looked around, finding that he was in the same seat away from Hinata. He groaned, then gave Naruto the, what the crap, stare. Naruto shrugged. Then noticed how Kiba missed most of the scroll. He made an O with his mouth, then made a hand gesture to Kiba saying he missed. Everyone watched as Kiba nodded in understanding, while everyone else was confused, mainly Neji. So he reached over and scooped some of Naruto's potatoes. I wouldn't. Ten tried to warn him, but Kiba already plopped the spoonful onto the scroll. She covered her mouth with both hands. Itachi smirked. Sasuke just stared as Kiba fisted his hands and squeezed his eyes tightly shut. Are they psychotic? He went to look at Naruto, who was staring eagerly at the scroll. That answers that. Kakashi sat back in his seat laughing slightly. This definitely fit. Hinata let out a giggle, which immediately got Kiba's attention. He flew his eyes open and leaned over to see her. He sighed a lovesick sigh, which only pissed Neji off more. Neji bolted up. What is your problem? Why did you throw potatoes at me 2 times? Kiba looked at him, then blinked and realized it didn't work. Naruto slumped onto the table disappointed. Neji threw his hands in the air and started yelling. What didn't work? What are you talking about? Ten scratched behind her ear watching Neji. Wow, it's not like Neji to explode like this, but I guess I would too if someone threw food at me. Twice. That was hilarious. She smiled, then she noticed Hinata laughing and smiled again. Hinata was very self-conscious, so for her to just laugh without even trying to hold back was rare. She wasn't even blushing. After dinner, Kiba ran to the room and fell asleep. Naruto helped Iruka into the room, and once they got inside, Naruto instantly fell asleep. The room was arranged with 3 beds, right besides each other. In between each bed was a nightstand with a lamp on it, along with other things. On the other far side of the room was the bathtub they used earlier. The door near the bathtub is where the toilet would be found. In between the bathtub and the beds is a nice sitting area. There was a window in front of the sitting area that allowed a view of the ocean. It also had some potted plants on the windowsill. Naruto slept in the middle bed, Kiba on the bed farthest from the door, and Iruka laid in the bed nearest the door. He hadn't fallen asleep yet, his hunger was keeping him up. Iruka sighed, closing his eyes. What I wouldn't do for some Mito Pla. 1. He pictured the dish in his mind, and subconsciously licked his lips. A knock broke Iruka's mental picture. Iruka sat up, then slipped off the bed. He carefully walked towards the light knocking, then searched for the doorknob. Hello? Iruka greeted. Ah, hello Iruka, did I wake you? Kakashi asked. Kakashi? Iruka opened the door fully open. No, I haven't fallen asleep yet. Oh. Kakashi smiled. Well, since I skipped out on dinner, I've become very hungry, and I remember you 2 passed on the meal. So, would you like to accompany me to get some food? Iruka thought for a moment. Yes, that would be marvelous, I am a little hungry. Good then. Kakashi grabbed Iruka's arm. Since you haven't changed out of your dinner clothes, let us be on our way. Dinner clothes? Are we supposed to change out of these too? The 2 left the palace grounds and went into a restaurant. What can I get you too? A man asked politely, recognizing Kakashi. Kakashi glanced at the menu. Would you give us a moment? The man nodded, then left. Now Iruka, what type of food do you like? Kakashi smiled, then looked at the menu. Why don't I read off what they have and you can tell me what you want? Iruka smiled, then nodded for him to start. The man had come back and Kakashi put in their orders. Iruka decided to have something called chicken teriyaki with a side salad, while Kakashi had the chicken fajita roll-up. Iruka had finished his chicken and smiled brightly at Kakashi. That was great. What was that called again? Chicken teriyaki. Kakashi smiled. After they both finished, they walked back up to the palace. Thank you for taking me out, Kakashi. Iruka did a slight bow. Kakashi just smiled and waved off his bowing. No need to thank me, I enjoyed your company. Kakashi dropped Iruka off at his bedroom. Iruka. Kakashi called, getting Iruka's attention. Would you mind accompanying me tomorrow? Oh. Iruka blushed a little. Sure, where did you want to go? Kakashi smiled. Let's leave that a mystery. Then he turned and walked away. In the morning, Naruto woke up first. Surprising, I know. Usually back in his palace he had to wake up early, right at the crack of dawn. Not every day, of course, only on days when there were political meetings, or when they had a guest over. Any other day he would sleep in till someone forced him awake. But here he wanted to wake up as early as possible, hoping that that would mean more time with him to bond with Sasuke. After waking up he rushed out of the room, quietly as to not wake up anyone else. He walked down the many halls, getting more and more frustrated with each turn he took. Where is he? Naruto threw his arms into the air in frustration. Naruto? Is that you? Naruto looked around but couldn't see anyone. Suddenly a big dog head appeared in the window besides Naruto. Ah! Naruto threw himself to the opposite wall. Taking deep breaths he clutched his heart, then looked back to the big dog head in the window. To his surprise though, the dog head had disappeared and Pakun was now on the window sill. I thought that was your scent, Pakun said, then turned his head back out the window. Thanks for the lift, bull. He jumped down and walked towards Naruto. Naruto had calmed down seeing Pakun and smiled down to him. He patted the dog's head a couple times. How's everything going? Pakun asked, brushing off Naruto's hand with his paw. Naruto gave him a thumbs up, but then he thought for a moment and dropped his thumb so it pointed down. Really? Why? Human not warming up to you? Pakun continued to question. Naruto raised his shoulders and lifted his hands up in an I don't know position. He then stood up and put his hands above his eyes, like a visor, and swirled his head around. You're looking for something? Pakun guessed. Naruto nodded, then used his hands and placed an invisible object on his head. Then he grabbed the air like he was holding a staff, and put the other hand on his hip, holding a serious expression. The king? Naruto shook his head. Queen? Again Naruto shook his head. No, prince. Naruto smiled brightly and rapidly shook his head. Yes. Him? I think I can help you. The smaller one, right? Naruto's smile brightened. Okay, then let's see. Pakun sniffed the air and walked off with Naruto following him. Naruto's smile began to fade with each dead end they ran into. Of course they had only been walking for about 15 minutes, but Naruto was impatient. Oh, he's coming our way, Pakun announced. Naruto's face instantly brightened and he started looking in all different directions, trying to catch a glimpse of Sasuke. Sasuke looked up from the floor as he turned the corner, only to be greeted with a smiling Naruto. Sasuke raised an eyebrow as he examined the blonde. Have you changed your clothes at all? He asked. Naruto looked himself over. Change? Isn't what I have on fine? He gave Sasuke a confused look. Sasuke closed his eyes and sighed. Dobi. Sasuke then dragged Naruto up to his room, with Pakun following. Surprisingly, Kiba and Iruka were gone when they arrived up there. Sasuke told Naruto to sit on his bed, then he walked over to the closet by the window and pulled out an outfitter, then glanced at Naruto. Hey, does this fit you? He tossed Naruto the shirt, then pants. Naruto held it up to himself and yup, it looked like it would fit. Okay Dobi, you get changed, I'll wait for you outside your door. With that he walked out of the room, leaving Pakun and Naruto alone. Pakun watched the door for a while, making sure Sasuke wouldn't come back in. Then he turned and walked towards Naruto. Need help? He offered. Naruto smiled gratefully and nodded, yes. Once Naruto had changed, he had on black pants and an orange shirt, not bright orange, more of a dull grayish orange, and black boots again. Sasuke wore a dark purple shirt with navy blue pants and a brighter purple sash to make his royalty known. There, now go out and have fun, I'm going to stay here. Pakun decided, flopping up onto Iruka's bed. Naruto smiled, then walked out to meet Sasuke. Once Naruto was out of the room, Sasuke stood straight up with his arms at his sides. He looked Naruto over. There, now what are your plans for the day, Naruto? To spend the day with you. Naruto thought. He had remembered not to mouth things as much he would on occasion, but at least he's not doing it excessively. Naruto shifted on his feet and bit the corner of his mouth, gazing at the ground. Sasuke watched this, then turned his head down the hall. Well, if you don't have any plans, would you like a tour of my kingdom? He looked back at Naruto. Yeah. Naruto bit his lip after blurting that out, turning his head to the side, frustrated at himself. Baka. Sasuke said, smirking, then he repeated the word as he led Naruto down the hallway. Sasuke had gotten permission from Itachi to take Naruto out on a tour without any supervision. It would take all the fun out of the day if you had a brigade of soldiers following you around everywhere, was Sasuke's excuse. Naruto waved to the eldest Uchiha as he and Sasuke rode out of the palace on a one-horse-drawn carriage. Naruto turned back around in his seat so that he was sitting properly. So Naruto, where would you like to go first? The Sasuke was interrupted by Naruto's stomach. Naruto blushed and covered his stomach with his arms. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Want to get some food? He asked, smirking. Naruto nodded sheepishly, so Sasuke steered the horse towards a restaurant. Once there, Sasuke and Naruto received their menus and Naruto pointed to the dish he wanted. Ramen? Sasuke shrugged. One bowl of ramen for my companion and Karula curry chicken in a skillet for me. The waiter bowed and took the menus from Sasuke and left to fill in their orders. They ate and Naruto decided he wanted more than one bowl, so Sasuke ordered him some more. After the fourth bowl, Sasuke was hiding his face in his hands. Naruto pushed the bowl towards Sasuke, signaling he wanted more. No, no more, now come on. Sasuke placed money on the table and stood up and waited for Naruto to follow. Naruto looked at the money Sasuke had placed at the table, then he pouted at his empty bowl of ramen. He looked up at Sasuke desperately, holding up one finger. One more. He mouthed slowly so that Sasuke would get it. Sasuke scoffed at him. No, he said in a monotone voice. Naruto put his finger down and glared at Sasuke. Sasuke folded his hands in front of his chest. Naruto, stand up and let's go, he commanded. That did it. Naruto is a prince, not up here, but he is still a prince, and yeah, most of his followers don't respect him, but hey, they still gave him what he wanted. They still treated him like a prince. So this whole, I command you and you follow, thing that Sasuke was starting wasn't going over too well. Naruto folded his arms in front of his chest, settled into the chair, and all the while keeping his glare at Sasuke. Sasuke lifted an eyebrow at Naruto, then commanded again. Naruto, get up. Naruto just smiled and snuggled his buttocks deeper into the chair. What the heck? I give an order and people follow it, that's how it goes. Sasuke tried to keep his face unemotional. He inhaled deeply and dropped his hands to his sides. Naruto. Naruto smiled brighter up to him. Let's go, he let out through gritted teeth. Naruto used one finger to tap his lips, then he held up the finger again and mouthed, one more. Sasuke looked at the finger and Naruto's smile brightened so much that his eyes shut. Everyone in the restaurant were dead silent and were watching their prince and some mystery man argue. Sasuke fisted his hands. Fine. He snapped and ordered a bowl of ramen. Naruto jumped up happily and quickly ate the food. Sasuke laid down additional money, then left the restaurant. Once both of them walked out of the door, gossip erupted inside. Sasuke commanded the horse to go and they were off to start their tour. Naruto was smiling the whole time for two reasons. 1. He was still overjoyed that he got his way. Iruka had always said he was as stubborn as a seahorse. 2. Because Sasuke seemed to let his victory pass, so they had a relaxed atmosphere while on their tour. Sasuke and Naruto were riding in the woods now. The woods weren't thick and there was a marked trail, so it wasn't like they could get lost. Sasuke had just finished telling Naruto one of the townsfolk's fairy tales that they made up based off the woods they were in. So now they were just riding along quietly. Sasuke glanced over to the blonde and found that Naruto was staring at the reins in Sasuke's hands. Sasuke glanced at the reins, then back to Naruto and vice versa. You want to try? He held them out to Naruto. Naruto looked up to Sasuke and shook his head, yes. So Sasuke handed him the reins cautiously. Okay. Now pull on them when you want him to stop and pull them to whichever side you want the horse to turn and whoa. Sasuke flew back into the cushion as Naruto whipped the reins. Naruto kept whipping them until the horse was running as fast as it could. It's like riding a seahorse, he thought, then saw a turn coming up. Turn. Turn. Sasuke yelled out and reached to take the reins back from Naruto. But Naruto eluded Sasuke's reach by pulling the reins hard over to the right, causing the horse to make a quick sharp turn. Needless to say, this action threw Sasuke back into the cushions and it caused him to bump shoulders with Naruto. But better, Naruto added in his mind, not noticing the vice grip Sasuke had on his shoulder. I'm going to die, was the only thought running through Sasuke's head. Naruto had been driving the carriage till the sun began to set. Then they took a break at a nice lagoon they had run by. Luckily there were a couple of rowboats left at what looked like an abandoned dock. Want to use this or do you feel like taking a swim? Sasuke asked. The swim wasn't looking so bad to him. Naruto's driving skills had him break into a nervous and fearful sweat, so he really felt like he needed to cool off. Naruto opened his mouth with a confident look on his face but then shut it and thought for a moment. Can I swim with legs? I mean, I know I'm an amazing swimmer, but I haven't swam with legs yet. Sasuke sighed. It was taking forever just for the Dobi to make a simple decision. But Sasuke remained patient and he was rewarded. Naruto pointed to the boat. Darn. Oh well, I'll just take a bath at home then, Sasuke thought as he carefully walked into the rowboat. Naruto followed behind him and sat in the front facing Sasuke. Better safe than dead, Naruto concluded, staring down into the water. How about a game? Sasuke suggested as he pulled the oars in and rested his head on top of his hands. He had been rowing for a while and they were far enough away from shore. Sasuke thought for a moment, trying to think of a game. Alright, I'll ask you a question and you try to describe your answer. Naruto nodded. Yes. This is going to be fun, Sasuke thought, smirking. First question, do you like seafood? Naruto nodded. Yes, duh. I've eaten food in the sea all my life. What's your favorite color? Naruto pointed to the shirt he was wearing. And these questions went on for a while. Next question. Have you ever had a girlfriend? Sasuke asked seriously. Naruto shook a no immediately. Good. Sasaki softened a bit. Naruto mouthed something but Sasuke didn't catch it. What? What about you? Naruto mouthed slowly and pointed to Sasuke at the end. No, Sasuke replied flatly. He sighed, looking around the lagoon. They had floated towards a weeping willow tree. Now they'd run into it later, but whatever, a few leaves never hurt anyone, so they'll be fine when they float into it. Have you ever had a boyfriend? Naruto's cheeks tinted pink a little while he shook his head. No. That's too bad, Sasuke said, folding his arms and closing his eyes. Guys are better than girls. Girls are too needy and persistent, plus you never know what they're thinking. They're basically a mess. Sasuke finished with a sigh. Naruto tried to smile but something was bugging him while Sasuke was explaining this. Did he already have a boyfriend? Naruto got depressed thinking that. But I can't really say that, I just heard that from Kakashi. Sasuke rested his head on his hands again, opening his eyes. Naruto was smiling back at him. Yes, he cheered. They sat in a comfortable silence as Naruto kept turning his head and getting all the sights of the lagoon in his head. The silence was broken though when a loon, the bird, called out. Naruto jumped a little and looked at Sasuke with a little fear. Sasuke had been watching Naruto the whole time, so their eyes immediately locked together. Sasuke's eyes widened a little, embarrassed. He was caught, but he noticed Naruto was scared. What's wrong? Sasuke asked. The loon called out again and Naruto flinched, turning his head to look around. Never heard a loon before? Sasuke asked sarcastically. Naruto shook his head. No. Sasuke resisted the urge of asking him where he was from. If he did, Naruto might want to leave and he didn't want that. So he shook his head and scratched his chin. It's just a... Sasuke fell silent and contemplated something for a moment. I have to stop reading Kakashi's books, he thought, but went with the idea he got from the book anyway. Naruto stared at him, waiting for him to finish his explanation. Hello? What is it? I want to know this. Sasuke glanced back up to Naruto, who was holding out his hands like he would receive something. Sasuke smirked. A loon is just a crazy person. He's probable just taking a walk, probable harmless. Naruto relaxed. Or not, Naruto stiffened and paled. But you should be fine as long as you stay close to me, too. That makes sense, right? No one would hurt Sasuke. I mean, he's their prince. They love and respect him. So Naruto bought it, but that didn't really stop his fear. Back to our game, Sasuke said. Then Sasuke noticed that Naruto was tapping his foot nervously and still jumped a little when the loon would call. His smirk grew, but he tried to hide it. Do you want to sit next to me? Yes. Naruto got up and sat right next to Sasuke immediately. Lie and comfort your prey. Sasuke quoted the rule that he used. Okay. So. Sasuke looked around and saw that they were headed into the weeping willow. Oh, duck for a minute. Naruto did, and Sasuke pulled them so that they were inside the willow tree's dangling branches. Once inside, they looked around. The fireflies went off randomly and sometimes you could hear a fish jump out of the water trying to catch a bug. Sasuke stole a glance Naruto. Naruto was so into it. He was looking around with this huge smile on his face. Alright Naruto, last question. Sasuke brought Naruto's attention back to him. He smirked. Would you let me kiss you? He asked in his emotionless voice, but he still held his smirk. Naruto's face turned a brighter red than any tomato Sasuke had ever seen. Sasuke looked down to him. Is that a yes? He asked again, unemotional, smirk still present. Yes. Oh my god. Yes. Open your mouth and say yes. Turn your head. Do something. Naruto couldn't get any of his body parts to work with him. So he just sat there red as a tomato looking at Sasuke. Sasuke didn't seem like he was interested in receiving an answer since his lips were already descending towards Naruto's. Kabuto swam over using momentum as his power and pushed the side of the boat, successfully flipping it over. He peered his head above the water, his eyes flashing yellow. Naruto was coughing up water as Sasuke helped him stand in the shallow water that Naruto thought would lead to his death. Well, the water was a little high. It was past their hips a little. You okay? Naruto coughed some more. Alright, come on. Sasuke threw one of Naruto's arms around his shoulder, holding it with one of his hands, and used his other arm to hold Naruto's waist. I have you. You're okay, he reassured. That little deviant. Orochimaru yelled in his cave. It's only the first day and he has the prince hooked. Orochimaru went silent for a minute, thinking. I need some time. Kabuto? Kabuto stiffened at Orochimaru's tone. Buy me some time. Do something that will buy me at least half a day. Yes, Lord Orochimaru. Kabuto whispered, floating back down into the water. At least I got that swim I wanted. Sasuke thought, trudging through the water, still holding Naruto. Kabuto skillfully swam behind Sasuke and grabbed both his ankles, pulling him backwards. Sasuke and Naruto both fell back into the water. Kabuto then quickly let go and swam away into a darker part of the water. Ah! Sasuke coughed. What was that? He continued to cough, standing up. You okay? Naruto shook his head, yes, while coughing. Wow, water really hurts your lungs when you're a human. Alright. Well, now we definitely have to take off these clothes. Naruto blushed and coughed up the remaining water he had in his lungs. If we stay in these, we'll catch our deaths. Sasuke finished and got out of the water, heading towards the carriage with Naruto following him. Sasuke moved some pillows that were on the carriage off onto the floor and lifted up the bottom of the seat and pulled out the blankets that were held there. Then he put the pillows back on the seats and placed the blankets on top of the seats as well. Alright. Sasuke said while taking off his sash then shirt. Here, we'll keep ourselves warm with these blankets on the way home, he said while wringing out his shirt. Naruto stared at Sasuke's back for a while, but when Sasuke started turning around, he quickly shot his gaze to the sand. Sasuke grabbed a blanket and wrapped it around himself and then saw Naruto still in his wet clothes. Dobi, how long does it take you to rid yourself of your shirt? Naruto scoffed at him, then turned and took off his shirt. He walked past Sasuke, not knowing Sasuke was watching him, and went to grab the other blanket. After Naruto took off his shirt, Sasuke noticed something on his stomach, something black. What's that? Naruto turned and Sasuke got a clear view of the thing. It was a black swirl with some strange markings around the swirl. Altogether it was just weird. What's that? Sasuke asked. Naruto pulled back his hand and looked at Sasuke, confused, titling his head to one side. Sasuke shook his head. That. He gestured to the swirl. Naruto looked at Sasuke's face, then his finger, then finally he scanned his body. Suddenly his eyes widened considerable and he turned around and grabbed the blanket, in a blink of the eye, instantly wrapping it around himself and covering his stomach. Sasuke leaned onto one of his feet. What's wrong? What is it? Naruto gulped silently, then turned and waved his hand at Sasuke with a relaxed face as if saying, it's nothing. Sasuke narrowed his eyes. He did not like being left in the dark. Kabuto surfaced his head, his eyes flashing yellow, then he submerged and swam away. Sasuke half growled but figured he couldn't really get Naruto to explain since, well, he couldn't. So he just scoffed and moodily got into the carriage. The carriage ride back to the palace was quiet for a couple of reasons. First, and probable the main reason it was quiet was because Naruto was mute and couldn't strike up a conversation. Second, Naruto had fallen asleep. And finally, because Sasuke was still wondering over that swirl thing. He couldn't help it. He hated not nowhere getting close to the palace now, and the swirl thing just wouldn't leave Sasuke's mind. Maybe I could get Kiba to tell me about it, I'm sure he knows. Sasuke thought as they pulled up to the front of the palace. Welcome back, Your Majesty. I trust your day was enjoyable, an employee said, bowing. HN. Sasuke's usual response. Where is Kiba? Kiba, sir? The man asked. The brunette man with 2 red markings on each cheek. Sasuke explained as another servant ran over to him with 2 new shirts. The man thought for a moment as Sasuke pulled over the new shirt. Oh, I believe he was seen strolling down the halls, not too long ago. My guess is he is probably still wandering around. Sasuke nodded thanks. Then wrapped the blanket tighter around Naruto and threw the shirt that had been delivered to him over Naruto. Then he picked him up bridal style and walked into the palace. He walked into Naruto's room without knocking, but no one was in there, so no harm done. He put Naruto down in his bed, then tucked him in. I feel like his nanny Naruto didn't seem to mind. Actually, he subconsciously helped a little. Sasuke finished and stood up ready to go look for Kiba. But he looked down at Naruto for a moment, then pulled back Naruto's covers and looked at the swirl thing, since Naruto still didn't have a shirt on. He studied it until it was engraved in his brain. Okay, and maybe he memorized other parts of Naruto's torso, but mainly he was focusing on the swirl. Then he recovered Naruto and left the room. He trudged out into the halls and walked around for only about 2 minutes, then he found Kiba heading towards him. Kiba. Kiba looked at him smiling brightly. I have a question for you. Kiba walked over to him still smiling, which was starting to creep Sasuke out a bit. Sasuke cleared his throat. Today I noticed that Naruto has this swirl-like thing on this lower torso, and I can't help but wonder what it is. Kiba's smile dropped immediately after Sasuke had finished. He stared Sasuke down in the eyes. Then in a serious voice he said, "That's none of your concern." And before Sasuke had the chance to retort, he walked right past him. Sasuke turned and glared at Kiba's back. Okay, now I've got to know what that thing is. Sasuke turned and stormed towards their library. I'm not going to rest until I find out what Naruto's keeping from me. Kiba sat up and rubbed his eyes while muttering, "What's with all the noise?" Iruka stopped moving and turned towards Kiba. "Good, you're awake." He smiled. "Come help me." Kiba yawned and got up. He looked around and noticed Naruto wasn't there, but shrugged it off, not really caring. "What, cha need?" he asked, walking next to Iruka. "Last night Kakashi said that I hadn't changed out of these clothes." He pointed to the clothes they had on. "So it was okay to go out with him." "What? You already got a date?" Kiba fumed, interrupting Iruka. "You don't even like humans and you got a date before me. I haven't even had proper conversation with Hinata. And you've already gone out on a date." Kiba flung his hands in the air, cursing as he stomped around the room. "I like humans now," Iruka said sternly, for own his defense. Kiba swung his head over to Iruka and stomped back over to him. "Only because you have the hots for one of them," he fumed. After a few seconds Kiba sighed, and asked what Iruka was trying to get at by bringing that story up. "So, we have to change, again?" Kiba asked, scratching the back of his neck. "I think so," Iruka said, also a little puzzled. "All right then, let's get change." A few minutes later they had their new clothes on. Iruka had on an ocean blue shirt with black pants. He wore the same black boots from yesterday. Kiba wore a light green shirt that buttoned up the front and, naturally, black pants with black boots. "Well, I'm off to find Kakashi," Iruka said, turning. "Oh, Iruka?" Kiba rushed while zipping up his pants. He hurried and grabbed Iruka's arm. Before Iruka could walk any closer towards the chair he was about to run into. "You're heading the wrong way," Kiba said, and turned him towards the door. "You know what, why don't I go help you find Kakashi?" Kiba and Iruka left the room, then walked down the long hallway. They searched for a while, still not finding anyone. Iruka decided they needed a break, so they stood near a window which gave a nice view into one of the closed-in courtyards. And since they were on the second floor, the bushes didn't block their view. Kiba leaned on the windowsill trying to catch some of the light breeze. He looked down and on the far side of the courtyard saw Hinata sitting on a bench, reading something. Hinata. Kiba said excited. I have to go Iruka. He said walking away. You can find Kakashi on your own. Just yell out his name. He finished then broke out into a sprint looking for some stairs. Iruka heard Kiba run down the hall. He shook his head. Great, he thought sarcastically. Come on. Kiba glanced down the hallway, hoping to see some stairs. No, he turned and continued running down the halls. Finally he ran back to one of the courtyard's windows, and checked to make sure Hinata was still there. Kiba looked around again then cursed the stairs that he couldn't find. Come on, this is one of my only chances. I have to talk to her. He hid his face in his hands groaning. He looked back up and saw Hinata stand, getting ready to come back inside this maze of a castle. Kiba panicked. I gotta catch her. He looked around frantically again. Then he looked out the window, and saw Hinata leaving the courtyard. Panicking even more, he looked out the window. He thought for a minute then shrugged. What the heck? He thought, deciding to give his plan a shot. He leaned over the windowsill and jumped into one of the bushes. Hinata turned around immediately after hearing numerous sticks break. She clutched the book tighter as she walked towards the moving bush. Hello. Kiba finally rolled out of the bush with an ow, and shook his head, trying to get everything back into focus. When he did, he scanned the courtyard, and when his eyes landed on Hinata he blushed a deep red. Hi. He blurted out. Hinata bent down by Kiba and placed her book on the grass. Why? You okay? Kiba blushed even more but smiled, and shook his head, yes. As if snapping back to reality, Kiba shot up and dusted himself off. Hinata stood and picked up her book. Kiba began. Sorry about the. Kiba looked at the thing he landed on. Bush. Hinata helped. Yeah. Kiba said embarrassed. Sorry about the bush. Hinata smiled. It's okay. Kiba smiled back at her. Would you like to hang out today? Kiba asked, blushing a deep red from the embarrassment of just asking her that right out of the blue. Hinata blushed the same shade as Kiba. I just have to put this book back. Hinata held out the book as proof, then sure. They both looked at the ground blushing and smiling as Kiba followed Hinata into the library. After they dropped the book off they left the palace and walked into town to look around. So, do you ever wear your hair down? Kiba asked. Hinata reached a hand up to her hair. She thought for a minute and no, she never has. Of course she put her hair down for bed, but other than that no. No, she thought for a minute. Why? Because I think it would look good down. Kiba blurted out then blushed as did Hinata. Should I? Try it? She asked looking at the ground. Now she was also wondering about it. All the bobby pins in her hair did hurt, and half the time her head felt like it would fall off from all the weight. Yeah, if you want. Kiba said quietly. Hinata smiled then they walked over to a bench, where she proceeded to take out all the ties and pins. Kiba sat and watched, not knowing what else to do. Finally Hinata finished and her hair flowed down. She petted a couple of times and combed it with her fingers to smooth it out. You look great. Kiba half yelled. She blushed and tucked some of her hair behind her ear. They got up, leaving all the pins and ties behind, and resumed their walk. Why do yo? Hinata pointed to her own cheeks so he would know what she was talking about. Oh, these. Kiba pushed on the red marks. Hinata nodded. Well, I just do, I guess. I mean everyone in my family has these marks. Who's in your F family? She asked a little louder. Kiba thought for a minute. Well, I have an older sister named Hannah. She's a better fighter than I am, so my mom glorifies her a lot. Kiba looked at the ground. But Hannah always encourages me, she's really nice. Then he smiled at Hinata. Hinata looked down to the ground, upset. Kiba was about to ask what was wrong when Hinata spoke up. My sister is younger than me, but my father values her more than me. Her name's Hanabi, she's very nice too, but... Kiba looked at Hinata, understanding. Yeah, seems like we just can't match our siblings. He laughed. Hinata looked up at him. But that's fine with me, I'm fine with being just the way I am. Hinata smiled then looked forward. Why yeah, you're alright. Kiba looked ahead and saw something he actually recognized. Hinata. She looked at him. He did a slight bow, and then outstretched his hand. Would you dance with me? He blushed, still bowing. Hinata blushed but grabbed his hand and they joined the other couples dancing. They danced for a long time. They finally stopped when it was in between lunch and dinner. They needed to get some food. Kiba told jokes as they walked, making it seem short. Finally arriving at a decent restaurant, Kiba just ordered whatever Hinata ordered. It didn't affect him in any way. They were walking home when they heard some noise coming from a nearby alley. Kiba, wanting to protect Hinata, grabbed her shoulder and pulled her closer to him. Hinata's face lit up redder than a flame as he did this. They neared the palace and Kiba still had his arm around Hinata. Kiba still heard some noises coming from behind them, so he tried to get a glimpse by turning his head, but he never saw anything. Is something wrong? Hinata asked, noticing how Kiba looked over his shoulder. I think someone's following us, he said. Finally he turned around, letting go of Hinata's shoulder, and was ready to punch someone. He froze and put his fists down. Hinata, who had ran behind him for protection, looked over his shoulder. She smiled and walked towards the puppy. Kiba couldn't believe it. A dog was following them around, not anything bad or evil, but a dog. He looked at Hinata, who was trying to get the puppy to come to her, but the dog didn't want to. Kiba walked over by Hinata and squatted down next to her. He looked at her, her hand was stretched out and she curled her fingers, calling the puppy. Kiba smiled at her, then looked at the dog. You like him? He asked her. She smiled at him, then back at the puppy and tried calling it again. Why yes, he's probably hungry, she said, noting the small dog's thin waist. The dog was white and had some brown spots on his ears. Kiba smiled at him, then called out for him like Hinata. The dog sniffed the pavement in front of the two, but ran away when a carriage ride passed them. Oh. Hinata stood up and watched the dog run away. Aw man, poor dog. Kiba said. He looked back at Hinata, then over to their previous path. He sighed. We should get back. Kiba turned and stopped, waiting for Hinata. She sighed, nodding, then turned and walked back up with Kiba. Finally they made it to Hinata's room. She opened the door and Kiba began walking down the hall to his own room, when Hinata's quiet voice caught his ear. He looked back at her to see that she was standing in her doorway, tapping her fingers together, blushing, and studying the floor. I really liked spending the day with you, she said shyly. Kiba blushed and smiled. I liked it too. Spending the day with you, I mean. Hinata looked at him. We should go look for that dog tomorrow, she smiled shyly. Kiba's smile brightened. Yeah. Then she turned into their room and Kiba waited for a minute, then slowly walked down the hall, smiling and walking nowhere in particular. He got a date. Any sign of them? Asked a worried king. No, Your Highness. A small seahorse messenger said, bowing respectfully. Yodayami's features scrunched up and he boomed so that his whole palace could hear him. Find them. Leave no coral bed unsearched, no stone unturned. Yes, Your Majesty. The seahorse said, then swam off. Yodayami sunk back into his throne. What have I done? He said, covering his face with one of his hands. Iruka listened to Kiba's retreating footsteps and sighed. So not knowing what else to do, he decided to just walk around. You can find Kakashi on your own, just yell out his name. Iruka thought about this. Well, that's how I used to find Naruto when he was little. Iruka took in a gulp of air, cupping the area around his mouth. Kakashi. He took another gulp. Can you hear me? He stopped and listened, but he didn't hear any response. So he waited a little more, then yelled out again. Kakashi. This time he heard hurried footsteps coming towards his direction, but the person he heard wasn't the person he was hoping for. Iruka, are you okay? Ten asked, running up to him and grabbing his arm. Did you need Kakashi for something? Oh, hello, Miss Ten. Iruka smiled, recognizing the girl's voice. Yes, we made plans today, so I was. Oh, Ten smiled, understanding. Well, let's go find him. They walked around the palace searching. Ten asked each butler and maid if they had seen Kakashi. Finally, after maybe half an hour and still no sign of him, Iruka decided to go back to his room. I'm sorry that I couldn't find Kakashi for you, Ten apologized. It's all right. Please don't beat yourself up over it, Iruka reassured with a smile. 10:10 left as Iruka walked into his room. Once inside, Iruka sighed disappointed. Oh, there you are. Iruka flipped his head up towards the voice, startled. He recognized that voice. Kakashi? Yes. Kakashi smiled. My apologizes for being late, but a maid fell and asked me to deliver a robe to Prince Itachi. I thought you forgot. Iruka admitted, looking at the ground. Forget a date with you? Kakashi linked both his and Iruka's arm. I would never. Iruka blushed, a bright red, as they walked out of the bedroom. Kakashi had them walk along the beach. It was shining as the sand felt soft and relaxing between their toes. So where are you from, Iruka? Kakashi asked, letting go of Iruka's arm. Iruka racked his brain, trying to think of something to say other than the truth. I come from the west. Yes, the west. Our ship broke on its way over here to the east. He lied, fumbling with his hands. Kakashi smiled at Iruka's obvious lie. I see. What did you think about that story Hinata told us yesterday? This has to strike a chord. Kakashi knew that there was a definite connection between the guy that saved him and Iruka. The connection was that they're the same people. As for how, he wasn't always for the supernatural, but the mermaid men thing would fit. Besides, it was like his old friend Obito used to constantly tell him, not everything is logical. Iruka's face turned serious. I think that people should get both sides of a story before spreading it around. I agree. So do you believe in mermaids and such? Yes. Iruka answered. Do you? Definitely. Kakashi answered, smiling. Then he stopped and turned to the ocean. Iruka, sensing Kakashi stopped as well. Have you always been blind, Iruka? Kakashi asked, looking to the ponytailed man. No, Iruka answered, unsure if he should really tell Kakashi that. Kakashi nodded. He turned to the sea and spoke in monotone. When I was sailing back here with Sasuke, our ship got caught up in a rough storm. That's where I got this eye patch. He touched the material even though Iruka couldn't see it. You can't see it, but my left eye got cut up badly. Iruka bit his lip. He knew what Kakashi was talking about. He was the one who saved the man after all. I fell off the boat and I couldn't breathe. The seawater burned my eye and all the things falling off the boat kept hid was going to die. Iruka gulped. But then I felt myself being carried. After that I blanked out. When I came to, everything was a blur. The only thing I could make out was someone's brown hair and that they had a scar across their nose. Iruka's eyes grew. He saw me. Kakashi noted that Iruka's facial change. It is him, he finalized. Well, enough talking. Shall we go get some food? Kakashi got all the backup information he needed, so now all he wanted to do was enjoy the day with his Iruka. Kakashi went to link their arms again, but Iruka grabbed his arm. Iruka let his fingers fall down Kakashi's arm till he reached Kakashi's hand. He grabbed Kakashi's hand and interlocked their fingers. Kakashi smiled at how cute Iruka was. Then they walked into the busy town. They ate at the same restaurant and Iruka ordered the same meal, as did Kakashi. They talked and then once the moon was rising, they started to head back to the palace. On their way there, Kakashi outstretched his hand and picked one of the flowers. Here. Kakashi held it up to Iruka. It's a flower, a lilac to be exact. Iruka sniffed the flower and it smelled great. Thank you. Iruka smiled and then they continued their journey back to the palace. They talked more along the way to Iruka's room. Iruka grabbed the doorknob with his other hand, the flower in his other hand, and opened it. Thank you. Iruka began, but Kakashi interrupted. I never told you what a lilac stands for, did I? He smiled, and Iruka scrunched up his face. That came out of nowhere. Iruka thought. Kakashi smiled lightly at Iruka's face. A lilac, he leaned his face down so it would hover around Iruka's. Stands for. He leaned further and Iruka could feel his breath over his face. Your first love. 2. Right as Kakashi finished saying love, he pressed his lips onto Iruka's. He just held it there, then pulled away. Smiling brightly and walked away, leaving a very flustered Iruka. Iruka walked into his room still flustered and blushing. Iruka climbed into his bed, placing the lilac on the nightstand. And then he tried to fall asleep. Yet his mind would just go back to the recent event and he would start blushing and get even more flustered. Kiba woke up groggily. He yawned, then stretched his arms. He stood up and got changed into another outfit. A simple outfit this time. A white shirt with a black vest over it, and the traditional black pants and black boot. He was now fully awake and recapped over what happened yesterday. Remembering what Sasuke said, he glared at Naruto's sleeping form and stormed over to his friend. He grabbed Naruto's sheets, then yanked them from the blonde and yelling, "Wake up!" Naruto rolled off his bed with a thud. Ow! Naruto rubbed his now sore bum. Iruka shot up out of bed startled. "Kiba, what's wrong?" Ignoring Iruka, Kiba bellowed down to Naruto. "What's with you and Sasuke?" "Kiba, what are you talking about?" Iruka asked, relaxing back into his bed, thinking Kiba was just exaggerating again. Ignoring Iruka and Naruto's confused gaze, he continued. "Last night, Sasuke came up to me and asked about a swirl on your lower torso. Did you tell him about your scar?" "What?" Iruka yelled, falling out of his bed at hearing this. "Naruto, is this true? Did he see your scar? Did you tell him about it?" Naruto looked at them like they were idiots, which in this case they were. "Yes, I told him all about it, and then in detail." "Of course not." Naruto stood up, throwing his hands in the air. "I can't talk. How do you think I would have explained it to him?" Kiba, not being able to decipher what Naruto was mouthing, just came to his own conclusion. "Oh wait, you couldn't have told him anything, you can't talk." Naruto smacked his forehead and fell back onto his bed. "Well, how did he find out?" Iruka asked. Naruto propped his head up and mouthed, "He saw it." "He saw it?" Kiba repeated, making sure he deciphered right. Naruto nodded a yes, to confirm this. "Well, this really isn't a big deal," Iruka reassured. Kiba started freaking out in his face. "Not a big deal. Hello. If Sasuke finds out that's the scar Naruto got from being experimented on, it's over. We'll get kicked out, we won't get any of our kisses, and then we'll all belong to Orochimaru," he yelled. "Yell it out loud, Kiba, that's the smart thing to do," Naruto yelled back at his friend. "Listen," Iruka yelled back, waving his arm demanding silence. "I highly doubt that he'll ever find out the details behind Naruto's scar. Where would he even get any information about it?" Kiba thought this over. Finding that what Iruka said was true, he calmed down. Then Iruka flinched and blushed as a scene from last night popped into his head. About the kiss." He scratched the side of his cheek. Kiba and Naruto watched him, each of them had their eyebrows up, questioning. "Last night." Kakashi, he turned his gaze to the ceiling. Kiba and Naruto glanced at each other, then back to Iruka, confused. "Well, Kiba's confused face slowly turned serious, as Iruka explained what happened on his date yesterday. Naruto's jaw dropped open immediately when Iruka announced that he already got his kiss. "What?" Kiba yelled, face bright red with anger. Naruto was still in shock as Kiba began cussing out Iruka. "I can't believe this. Oh my god." Kiba stormed around the room. "You weren't even for this idea. And you, oh." He shook his fist in Iruka's face before storming around the room again. Iruka couldn't help but smile at hearing Kiba's reaction, it was funny. Naruto still just sat on the bed and blinked. Iruka, who wasn't even for this idea, got his kiss first, Naruto thought. It took a moment, but he finally jolted up, yelling, "Unjust, not fair." Now both teens were storming around the room. One mouthing curses, the other yelling them. After both boys had settled down, Iruka and Naruto got dressed. Naruto was finishing putting on his navy blue shirt when Iruka started talking again. "This is the second day. You two have today and tomorrow to get your kiss," Iruka explained. Kiba, who was sitting on one of the chairs, waved his hand at Iruka. Yeah, we know." He then bounced up and straightened out his clothes. "Well, I'm off, I've got a date with Hinata." He smiled, then walked out of the door, leaving Iruka and Naruto. "I'll also be leaving. I'm off to find Kakashi." He smiled. "Naruto, you better go find Sasuke, and if he asks you about your scar, just shrug it off, okay?" Not expecting to hear or see an answer, he felt around for the door, then left. Naruto sighed. "Well, I guess it's a good thing Iruka got his kiss, and he seems really happy." Naruto smiled but then pouted, folding his arms over his chest. "But I really wanted to have Sasuke kiss me first." Naruto left the room and started his search for the youngest prince, but instead of running into Sasuke, he ran into Itachi. "Oh, hello Naruto," Itachi greeted. "What are you doing wandering the halls?" "Looking for Sasuke." He mouthed slowly. My apologizes. What? Itachi said, not quite deciphering what Naruto said. Naruto sighed, then even slower mouthed. Looking. Then he held one hand over his eyes. Looking? Naruto nodded yes, and then held up 4 fingers. Looking for? Itachi said, piecing the words together. Naruto looked down, thinking about how to describe Sasuke. His eyes widened when an idea hit him. Then he looked back up to Itachi and pointed to him, then held his hand low to the ground, then he repeated this. Looking for? My little brother? Itachi asked. Naruto nodded another yes, smiling. Itachi sighed at the odd moment he just experienced. Then closed his eyes, trying to think of when he last saw his brother. Well, I believe he's out today. I think he went to go see someone. Itachi looked down to Naruto, who had a questioning gaze, and as if able to read Naruto's mind, he said, I don't know who he went to see. Naruto sighed, disappointed. Itachi tried to think of how to handle the now awkward situation. Would you like to meet my parents? They're expected back this morning. Hinata's too. We could have breakfast then go greet them. Itachi offered, no do. Naruto smiled gratefully, and nodded a small yes. Itachi nodded, then led the blonde towards the dining room. Once there, Itachi sat across from the blonde. They both enjoyed their eggs, sausage, omelets, toast, and orange juice. Have you enjoyed your stay here? Itachi asked, taking a sip of his orange juice. Naruto nodded a yes, taking a bit of his toast. Itachi filed the breakfast with simple yes or no questions, until they both finished. Then they went to go see if the queen and king had returned. Upon entering the throne room, they were greeted by Itachi and Sasuke's parents. Itachi, darling. Makoto, Sasuke's mother, said, smiling. Itachi smiled slightly, then nodded to his mother and father. This is Naruto. Itachi said, using his right hand, and gestured towards Naruto, who flinched then bowed respectively. Who is this? Fugaku, Sasuke's father, asked. He and his companions washed up on our beach. Sasuke and I found them and asked if they would like to stay here. Itachi explained as his mother walked closer to Naruto. Oh, you poor child, she said, then rubbed one of his cheeks. These must be from your shipwreck, oh poor dear. She said, meaning the 3 marks on his cheek. Then she wrapped Naruto in a hug. Itachi walked over to his father as Makoto kept smothering Naruto. The oldest man of their group is blind. This one cannot speak and the last is perfectly normal from the looks of him, Itachi informed his father. Fugaku sighed. When do they plan on leaving? I don't know when, but they've only been here a few days. Fugaku nodded, then went to leave. Besides, Fugaku stopped, then turned back to Itachi. I think some people in the castle have taken a shine to these 3 gentlemen. Itachi emphasized shine, trying to make sure his father got his meaning. HN. Fugaku said, nodding, then left, with Itachi following. Now isn't that rude, leaving you and I all by ourselves? Makoto asked as she watched her son and husband leave. She shook her head, but then she quickly turned her attention back to Naruto, smiling. Well, we'll just have to do without them. Come along. Naruto shrugged and followed, not knowing what else to do. As they walked around the palace, Makoto decided to learn more about the poor blonde man she was walking with. So you were shipwrecked. I'm so sorry. My son, Sasuke, was in a shipwreck earlier this week, but I just learned of this today. She sighed, upset. I hope he's okay. You wouldn't know how he is, would you? Naruto smiled and nodded a yes. Makoto smiled happily. Speak up then, how is he? Naruto's smile faltered, then after a few seconds he tried to mouth as best he could. I can't talk. What was that, Naruto? I can't hear you. She stopped and leaned down closer to him. Even slower, Naruto mouthed. He pointed to himself. Can't. He made his hands move back and forth horizontally. Talk. He used his hand to mimic talking. You can't speak. Oh, she said, standing straight up and placed a gloved hand over her heart. I am so sorry. Naruto smiled and shrugged it off. This caused Makoto to smile. So am I to presume that you've been spending time with my youngest son? Naruto nodded a yes, still smiling. He's a nice boy, isn't he? She asked, smiling. Again Naruto nodded yes. Finally Makoto opened a door, and inside was a library. She walked fully in and smiled at all the servants. I like to come here to relax and think. I would be delighted if you joined me, Makoto said, sitting herself on one of the comfy couches. Naruto sat down on a comfortable-looking chair and made himself comfortable. Makoto grabbed the supplied tea that a servant laid out and took a sip. They talked. Well, mainly Makoto told Naruto stories about Sasuke and when he was little. Then later on, past lunchtime, Makoto was called away. Naruto decided to stay in the library. He wasn't much of a book fan though. In his kingdom they had different types of books, but both these and his books have the same basic principle: boring reading. After some time of wandering around, he decided to go get some lunch. He walked into the dining room to see 1010. She quickly ordered him some food, and by the time he was done it was dark out. Not a single sign of Sasuke all day. He sighed walking into his room. Naruto? Kiba? Getting no response, Iruka guessed the next name that popped into his head. Kakashi? Naruto's eyebrow twitched, then he hit Iruka in the arm. Ah, Naruto. Iruka yelled on instinct, then it clicked that Naruto was indeed the other person in his room. Oh. Naruto twirled his head around, then jumped onto his bed, depressed. Ignoring Iruka's babbling, he looked out the window at the stars, sighing. One more day. Kiba walked out of the room happy, and what increased his happiness was the fact that he didn't have to look very hard to find Hinata. She was waiting at the end of the hallway for him. She smiled up to him, blushing. Kiba smiled back to her, then they began their walk towards the palace's main gate. They talked and laughed as they left the castle and walked into the marketplace. As they walked around, they checked the alleyways that they passed trying to find the puppy from yesterday. Not finding a single sign of the dog, they began to lose hope. To try to change the mood, Kiba suggested, "How about we go watch a show or something?" Hinata looked at him, upset, but nodded a yes. Anyway, Kiba bit his lip, not knowing what to do. "How about that show?" Kiba said, pointing a weak finger over towards an open stand. Hinata looked towards where he was pointing and giggled once she saw what he was pointing at. "A puppet show?" she asked through giggles. Kiba looked at her confused. "A what?" She turned to him, stopping her giggling. "A puppet show." Kiba still gave her a confused gaze. "You know, when a person controls the puppet." Kiba glanced around, smacking his lips. She sighed, trying to stop her oncoming laughter, and then she smiled up to him, blushing very lightly. Why don't we just go watch it?" He smiled down to her and they went and watched the short little show. After it finished they walked past the stand to leave, but Kiba backtracked and grabbed the puppet off the hand that was still holding it. "Oh, so that's how it works," Kiba yelled happily, finding a human hand underneath. "K Kiba!" Hinata yelled, running over to him. She grabbed his arm and dragged him away from the stand, causing him to drop the fabricated puppet. They walked around some more, talking. They stopped when they heard some whimpering coming from an alleyway. Hinata was the first to react. She turned on her heels and ran towards the alley. Kiba ran right behind her and then grabbed her arm when she stopped. In the alley was the puppy from last night. He was pawing at the back door to a restaurant. He must be hungry," Hinata said as Kiba let go of her arm. "Stay here, I'll get him." Kiba turned towards the dog and walked over to him. The dog, finally noticing Kiba's presence, flinched and jumped further back. "It's okay," Kiba cooed. "Are you hungry?" At hearing this, the dog's ears perked up, and he took a cautious step forward. "Yeah, see me and that girl over there." He pointed to Hinata, who bent down and waved, walking closer to Kiba. "We can get you some food." "Why, yes," Hinata assured. The dig took a couple steps forward, then back, then he came up to Kiba's hand and sniffed it. After the dog jumped back and forth a couple more times, he decided the two were okay. He barked happily up them, wagging his tail. Kiba picked him up carefully. Hinata smiled up to him, then at the dog. They took him into a restaurant with them and ordered their own food, along with a dish for the dog. What should we name him?" Hinata asked, before eating some of her spaghetti. "How about," Kiba thought for a minute, "Akamaru?" "Akamaru?" Hinata asked. Did you check if he was a b-boy?" "Huh?" Kiba asked. I'll do it." She put her fork down and lifted Akamaru up. She blushed, putting him down. "He's a boy." "Then Akamaru it is," Kiba cheered, patting Akamaru's head. Akamaru barked happily, then continued eating. His had finished their meals. Hinata and Kiba took Akamaru to get checked out, to make sure he wasn't diseased or anything. He came out fine, and then they all left to go for a walk. They walked back to the palace, and Hinata carried Akamaru in, while they walked towards the dog section of the palace to drop Akamaru off, and get him acquainted with the other dogs. They ran into Hinata's younger sister, Hanabi. "Hinata," Hanabi called, running over towards the two. "Hanabi. How was your tea trip?" Hinata asked. "It was fine." Hanabi looked over to Kiba and the puppy in Hinata's arm. "Who is this?" Oh, Hinata started. "My name's Kiba." Kiba smiled, stretching out his hand. "It's a pleasure, Hanabi." Hanabi looked at his hand, then smiled and shook it lightly. "Yes, and it's a pleasure to meet you too." "Oh, and this is Akamaru," Kiba said, gesturing to the dog. "Hey Kiba, you have to be quiet, he's sleeping," Hinata said, covering the dog's one ear with her hand. "Oh, well Hinata," Hanabi said, getting Hinata's attention. "Father wants to see you. I think it would be alright if Kiba went with you." Oh, Hinata said, her shoulders slumping. "Oh, okay." Kiba raised an eyebrow to Hinata's sudden mood swing. He put his hand on her shoulder, and smiled at her, which caused her to smile while blushing. "I'd be happy to meet your father," he smiled, and then turned to Hanabi. "Could you put Akamaru with the other dogs? There's a dog named Pakin in there, if you call him he'll come to you. Hand Akamaru over to him. He'll take care of him." Hanabi looked confused. She blinked a couple times but nodded and took Akamaru. Kiba and Hinata smiled at her retreating figure, then Hinata led the way down to the throne room. When they arrived, no one was in there except for some servants. Hinata asked if any of them had seen her father, and they said he was out in the southwest courtyard. So then the two made their way down there. This time Kiba filled their walks with laughter, making jokes and such. The two walked into the courtyard and Hinata's shoulders slumped again. She looked at her father. "Hinata." Hiyashi, Hinata's father, called, looking over his eldest daughter's outfit. "Why are you in such casual attire?" he asked, practically scoffing at her dress. Her hair was down and she wore a blue dress which fit her body nicely and wasn't puffing out. And to tie the stray hairs out of her face, she had a blue bow in her hair. She tried, but couldn't think of anything. "And who is this?" Hiyashi said, gesturing to Kiba. "Oh, hello, my name is Kiba," Kiba said politely, extending his hand. Hiyashi looked him over. "Ah yes, I heard the palace had some guests over." Kiba, seeing his hand being ignored, put it down, awkwardly. Hinata shifted, causing her arm to brush against Kiba's. He looked over to her and she gave him a small smile, blushing. Kiba smiled back to her, blushing a little. Hiyashi saw this out of the corner of his eye. "I would appreciate it if you didn't stand so close to my daughter," he said, turning his whole body towards the two. "Huh?" Kiba couldn't stop it from escaping his lips. "Please move away from my daughter," Hiyashi demanded, putting his arms behind his back. Kiba looked from Hiyashi to Hinata and back. Hinata bit her lip and looked down to the ground. "Why?" Kiba asked, not seeing a problem. Hiyashi exhaled through his nose. "You and my daughter are too close, and I don't approve of it." There was an underlined message there. They both heard it. He was really saying, "Don't try to get close to my daughter." Now Kiba could take things to a point. He was very polite, but this guy was being ridiculous. Kiba and Hinata were happy. Hiyashi just looked at Kiba and didn't approve of him. "No," Hiyashi glared at Hinata. She didn't look up at him but kept studying the ground. Kiba looked at Hinata shocked. He didn't expect. "No," she repeated. "Ill." She blushed a hard red. "Hinata." Kiba put his hand on her shoulder, bending down to try and see past her fallen hair and downturned face. Hinata turned to him with her head still down. She bit her lip and jumped a bit to push her lips on his. Hiyashi's jaw had dropped open, and his eyes had also doubled. Kiba's eyes doubled and his whole face turned pink, but he pushed back onto Hinata, to stabilize them and to deepen their kiss. Up through one of the windows, Hanabi's eyes widened and her jaw hung open a little, but through that she smiled for her sister. Hiyashi turned his face away from the scene as Kiba and Hinata melted into each other, her hair falling back into place as they kissed. Hiyashi coughed numerous times. Before the two parted, each of them were blushing a brilliant shade of red. Hiyashi still had his head turned away from the two. Perhaps I am misjudged you too," he coughed, straightening out his outfit. "I hope that we get to know each other more, Kiba." Me too." Kiba said, still blushing. After Hiyashi left, Hanabi yelled down from the window, smiling. Kiba, Hinata, would you two like to accompany me for dinner? Still blushing they agreed. XOXOXOXOXOXOXOX Orochimaru a pairs. XOXOXOXOXOXOXOXOXO. Itachi and Sasuke walked out onto the extended patio. It was late now, around midnight, judging by the moon. You could hear the seagulls and the water as it crashed against the sandy beach. The patio was placed by the sea, perfect for a Sunday brunch and other activities. It had a stairway that led down to the beach, so people could take a stroll. Itachi grabbed his cloak as it tried to blow over his face from the wind. Sasuke looked out over the sea, then sighed and turned to his brother with a serious stare. Itachi. He started. Finally going to tell me why you dragged me out here, at the hour? Itachi said in an emotionless voice. Sasuke glared at him. I have a theory. Itachi stared at him waiting to hear more. Sasuke folded his arms in front of himself, closing his eyes then reopening them again. I think Naruto is the one who saved me, he said, then turned his eyes out to the ocean. Itachi continued to stare at him, before sighing. And how would he do that? We found him on the shore. I don't know all the details, Sasuke stated, flinging his hands out to his side, but I have a strong hunch that he did. Sasuke. Itachi sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You told me yourself that the person who saved you had a voice. And as you put it, it was a very boisterous voice. Naruto can't talk at all. I know. Sasuke yelled, throwing his hands out in front of him. But what if he once had his voice? Kakashi even said that Iruka admitted to once having his sight. He may have had it as a child, Itachi tried to reason. No, and Kakashi agrees with me. He suspects that Iruka's the guy who saved him, Sasuke yelled out, stepping closer towards Itachi. Sasuke. Itachi said calmly, but Sasuke interrupted him. And Naruto has this mark on his stomach. Sasuke pointed to his own stomach. And I researched it. Sailors believe it's the mark from the experiment. You know, the one Hinata was talking about. Sasuke. Itachi kept trying throughout his whole explanation. Then once Sasuke was near the end, Itachi yelled. Listen. Itachi inhaled then exhaled to calm down. Sasuke scoffed then turned back to the ocean. Sasuke, Itachi said, and Sasuke glanced to him, through the corner of his eye. I talked with mother and father today. Sasuke instantly turned towards Itachi, with his arms at his sides. Father was against it, but with mother's help we got an okay, he said. Sasuke cocked an eyebrow at him. Itachi sighed then shook his head. It's okay. You don't have to make up excuses. Mother and father gave the okay for you and Naruto. Sasuke couldn't stop the shock from showing on his face, and he was about to ask how Itachi got that to go through, when Itachi answered for him. I am going to be the one who will provide an heir for the family. I just have to find a woman, Itachi said, smirking. Sasuke smiled at his brother and was about to thank him when a voice cut through their conversation. Excuse me, said a man who appeared from the stairwell. He wore a seashell necklace yellow. He had dark brown hair that framed his face nicely, purple eyes and skin darker than Sasuke's but lighter than Naruto's. He was smaller than Sasuke, but not by much. But could you help me? He-Man smirked as he saw some of the yellow glow go and spread into the two Uchiha's eyes. Both of them stiffened, standing straight. Yes. Sasuke said. Pakun raced down the halls, skidding every corner till he ran into Naruto, Iruka, and Kiba's room. Kiba had left the door open slightly since his mind was still in La La Land replaying Hinata kissing him. Pakun jumped on the first bed he saw, which happened to be Iruka's, and bit Iruka's arm. Ow! Iruka screamed, sitting up, flinging Pakun off of him and over to Naruto's bed. Kiba and Naruto shot up due to Iruka's scream, but once Naruto sat up, Pakun hid his face. Kiba watched Pakun slide down and plop into Naruto's lap. As they were about to ask him why he just barged into their room, Pakun yelled happily. Congratulations! Pakun barked up to Naruto. What? Naruto mouthed, as Iruka and Kiba waited for Pakun to elaborate. I knew you three could do it. Pakun jumped over to Kiba and started licking his face. Ah! Get off, Kiba said, swatting a hand to Pakun. What are you talking about? Iruka asked. The whole kingdom's talking about it. Pakun continued happily, jumping off Kiba and back onto Naruto's bed. How the prince is getting hitched this afternoon. Kiba, Naruto, and Iruka glanced at each other confused. Well, Iruka glanced in their general area. You know, Pakun said, seeing their confusion, he's getting married. Iruka gasped, as did Kiba. Then they both smiled brightly looking at Naruto. It took him a minute, but once it sunk in, Naruto's eyes widened and he jumped out of bed and ran out the door. We'll see you later, Kiba yelled as Naruto ran away. Naruto ran around the palace till he heard Makoto's voice. He turned and ran towards it, leading him to a grand staircase. He ran down it and was about to run even further down, when he saw Sasuke standing with his arm around somebody. Naruto backtracked a few steps, so that he was behind a pillar. He then peered down at them and listened in to what the Uchiha family was talking about. But I thought, Makoto started, her hands folded in front of her. Trust me mother, this is the right choice, Itachi said. Fugaku straightened himself out and eyed the boy Sasuke had chosen. Well, he started. If this is really the one, it is. Sasuke interrupted, tightening his hold on the smaller boy. We wish to be married tonight. Naruto pushed off the pillar, backing up a few steps. He stared in shock, trying to convince himself that he heard wrong. That's a little sudden, Makoto tried, but Itachi interrupted her. I think that's a great choice. Fugaku nodded in approval. Makoto smiled a weak smile at her sons, then turned to the boy Sasuke had his arm around. Welcome to the family, Vincent. Naruto gasped, taking more steps back. His chest heaved up and down, as he fought back tears. Not being able to take it anymore, he turned and ran down the nearest hallway. Vincent turned slightly, looking over his shoulder. He saw the mess of blonde hair running away and smirked triumphantly. Then he casually reached a hand up and adjusted his necklace, still smirking. Kiba walked over to Hinata and hugged her from behind. Hello Hinata. He smiled, as she returned his smile but wiggled out of his hug. She turned around, showing him that she had Akamaru in her arms. Akamaru barked happily up to Kiba and jumped to him. Kiba caught him and held him in with his one arm as he grabbed Hinata's hand with the other. This is so amazing, Kiba boasted, gazing at all the decorations. The whole ship just looked amazing, perfect for a wedding. Kiba snickered a bit, thinking about how he always pictured Naruto's wedding to be more orange. But before he and Hinata could take their seats, Pakun raced up to Kiba. Come on, and this. Come on, he growled impatiently, biting Kiba's leg. Ow. Okay. Kiba gave Akamaru to Hinata. I'll be right back, Hinata. And before Hinata could anything, Kiba was dragged away. Once Kiba and Pakun were off the ship, Pakun led Kiba around to the other side, where Iruka had Naruto in his arms. Kiba ran over to Naruto and Iruka, Pakun running behind him now. What's wrong? What happened? Kiba yelled. Naruto huddled himself into a tighter ball, as Iruka kept making circles on his back, and rocking him back and forth in his lap. Iruka explained to Kiba sadly. This isn't Naruto's wedding. Kiba looked at him confused. Sasuke's marrying someone else. Kiba's eyes widened. No, Iruka shook his head yes, and then proceeded to comfort Naruto. That's what I need to talk to you about. Pakun rushed out. Kiba and Iruka looked at him, while Naruto slowly sat up and got off Iruka's lap. I was walking. Well, of course I was walking. But I saw, and the mirror. Naruto rubbed his eyes and stared at Pakun in confusion. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? Pakun yelled, jumping on top on Iruka, causing the brunette to fall back onto the wooden dock. The prince is marrying the sea snake in disguise. What? Iruka yelled, flying Pakun off of him. All aboard, a man yelled as the ship's horn blew. What do we do? What do we do? Kiba asked, pacing back and forth. Iruka stood up and pointed towards a direction he hoped was towards Kiba and Naruto. We've got to stop that wedding. How? Kiba yelled. Naruto stood up and threw his head back and forth looking for anything that they could use. Pakun. Get on that ship and stall the wedding, Iruka ordered. Stall the wedding. Pakun repeated as he ran as fast as he could. He made it in the nick of time, and jumped onto the ship. Then it hit him. How am I supposed to stall a wedding? Iruka whistled a fancy tone, one that humans or Mers couldn't hear. Suddenly a nearby dolphin popped out of the water. The dolphin recognized Iruka and swam closer. "Go get Yodem," Iruka commanded, then the dolphin did a flip back into the water. "How are we supposed to get to the ship?" Kiba asked. "Why, how far is it?" Iruka asked. "Pretty far." Then Naruto ran over to Kiba and tugged at his arm. "What?" Naruto put on a determined face and pointed over to a small rowboat. Vincent walked up the aisle, his arm intertwined with Sasuke's. He smiled as he gazed at the crowd. Most were bowing their head out of respect. Akamaru growled up to him from the floor. Vincent scoffed and kicked him. Then resumed his walk up the aisle. Both Sasuke and Vincent reached the podium. The preacher, who looked quite aged, his glasses were huge and his eyes looked folded shut due to all his wrinkles, plus his back was arched over and he had to stand on a very tall stool in order to be able to read the book. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began. "How close are we?" Iruka asked. Kiba, while in mid-row, looked over his shoulder measuring the distance. "Getting closer." "Well, row faster," Iruka commanded. "Shut up, I'm doing the best I can here. This isn't exactly easy," Kiba defended himself. Naruto rolled his eyes at the two, then looked back at the wedding boat. "Sasuke." The preacher raised his shaky hand over towards Vincent. "And do you, Vincent, take Sasuke to be your husband?" Vincent looked over to the sun that was still in the sky heading towards the edge. He smirked. And as he opened his mouth to answer, dogs barking filled the air. He stopped and turned to see tons of dogs running towards him. "Ah!" he screamed, ducking as one smaller dog tried to launch itself at his face. He turned and scowled at the dog, then another dog came up from behind him and ran through his legs, tripping him. People all over the ship were screaming and running in all directions. Sasuke stood still at the podium as the preacher continued talking. Itachi sat straight up in his chair, eyes focused on the preacher. Hinata kept the best hold on Akamaru that she could manage as Neji walked over to her and Hanabi, guarding them from any dogs that may jump at them. Kakashi was yelling at the DM to calm down. Vincent rolled out of the way as a big dog tried to jump on top of him. He cursed the animals, then turned his head as he heard the sound of birds. He turned his head just in time to see a massive amount of birds swoop down at him. He ducked, covering his neck, luckily avoiding all of the birds. He turned to the sky and scowled at the creatures, cursing them. Akamaru was getting more and more reckless until he couldn't take it and lightly bit Hinata's arm. She epped and dropped him. He used this time to run into the crowd. Pakun ran over to Vincent and jumped up high enough, and when he came down he bit Vincent's buttocks. "Ah!" Vincent screamed. Then Akamaru jumped up aiming for Vincent's face, but since Vincent screamed he threw his head up in the air. This caused Akamaru to bit his necklace. The rope holding the necklace around his neck broke and Akamaru fell to the floor with the shell in his mouth. Vincent noticed this and grabbed Pakun, roughly, then threw him in some random direction. He then turned down to Akamaru, who was looking up at him. Vincent scowled, then made a grab for Akamaru, but Akamaru avoided his hand and ran off in another direction, under his legs. Naruto climbed onto the ship, his jaw slacking at the sight. Kiba helped Iruka get up, then he slumped to the floor exhausted. All three of them took in the sight. Well, Kiba and Naruto took in the sight. Iruka took in the noise, but they shook us off when they remembered that they had to find Vincent. "Akamaru," Hinata called, then she saw Kiba. "Kiba." Kiba, hearing his name, perked up and noticed Hinata. "Hinata." He got up and ran towards her. Vincent ran past Naruto, not even noticing the blonde was there. Naruto wasted no time and took off after Vincent, leaving Iruka alone. "Iruka!" Kakashi yelled, running over to him. "Are you okay? Where have you been?" "Yes, I'm fine. What's going on? Where's Sasuke?" Iruka asked frantically. Finally Akamaru ran up to the front of the ship, near the podium, and tripped. The shell flew out of his mouth and flew into the air. Naruto and Vincent watched as it flew in the air, then fall onto the ground, shattering. Sasuke grabbed his head as yellow flashed in his eyes. Itachi did the same, and then ran over to his brother, confused. Kiba and Hinata were already up near the front and saw the shell break. Iruka and Kakashi ran over next to them. "What's going on?" Kakashi asked. Hinata looked at him, giving him a confused look. She turned to Kiba but gasped and jumped back a bit when she saw some yellow glow flow into his mouth. All the guests on the boat calmed down and watched as the yellow stream of light flowed out of the broken shell and into Kiba, Iruka and Naruto. Iruka closed his eyes then blinked them open. He jumped slightly at all the sights. He turned taking in all the fascinating images. Kakashi put a hand on his shoulder. "Iruka, are you okay?" Iruka turned to him and blushed at how handsome Kakashi really was. He was too flustered to notice it when he saved Kakashi, so now it was a shock to him. "Iruka," Kakashi said, noticing Iruka's eyes, "can you see?" Naruto watched as the yellow light went towards him then slipped into his throat. He held his throat as the yellow light diminished. "Naruto," Sasuke called, running over to him. "What?" Sasuke looked around at the mess, and Vincent who had his eyes wide and a panicked look on his face. "What's going on?" Naruto smiled up to Sasuke. "Well, a lot really. First there was." "You can talk," Sasuke exclaimed grabbing Naruto's shoulders. "I tired to tell you be you," Naruto said. His and Sasuke's eyes locked onto each other. "The sun Naruto, the sun," Iruka yelled reminding him they were on a time limit. "Oh yeah." Naruto looked at Sasuke seriously. "I love you and if you love me you have to kiss me right now and I may MMPH." Sasuke had pulled him into a kiss, his tongue diving into the blonde's mouth, exploring all of it. Naruto definitely enjoyed this kiss more than the one he stole from Sasuke, and he would have enjoyed it further if not for a weird cackle. Sasuke and Naruto separated due to the maniacal laughter coming from behind them. Everyone turned to the source of the laughter. Vincent stood up laughing, his head still turned towards the ground, then he swayed back and forth a bit. Itachi, along with some other people, moved away from him. Then Vincent threw his head up to the sky laughing even harder. Kiba grabbed Hinata and held her close to him, as did Iruka to Kakashi, and Naruto to Sasuke. Vincent still didn't say anything but kept laughing. Then, suddenly he stopped laughing and stared straight at Naruto, causing the blonde to flinch. He let out a chuckle then whispered, then he smiled more and yelled loudly, "You're too late." Then lightning hit him and everyone covered their eyes from the blinding light. A tail wrapped around Iruka and Kiba and pulled them away from their loved ones. Sasuke and everyone else lowered their arms. Sasuke looked to Naruto but was, roughly pushed away. Naruto reached out a hand to grab him but his legs were replaced by his merman tail and he fell. Orochimaru used this to his advantage and grabbed Naruto's arm. Orochimaru wound a tighter grip on Kiba and Iruka's bodies, as they almost slipped through his tail due to their transformation. Then he pulled Naruto close to his chest. "See ya, lover boy," he said playfully towards Sasuke, then jumped into the water pulling the others with him. "Iruka," Kakashi yelled running towards the edge of the boat. Hinata and Sasuke did the same, calling for Naruto and Kiba. Sasuke hit the sides of the boat with his fist and turned around frantically looking for an answer. "Come on," Kakashi yelled to him, "we'll take that rowboat." He pointed to a rowboat that was tied to one of their pole anchors. Sasuke nodded, then both of them threw off their formal shirts, leaving them in their white undershirts. I'm coming too," Hinata yelled, but her father stopped her. "No Hinata, it's much too dangerous for a girl." Hiyashi put his hands on Hinata's shoulders. "They'll bring Kiba back to you, just stay here." Hinata bit her lip then pushed off her father's hands, crying, and ran into a private room. Neji followed her, hoping to cheer her up. "What's the deal, Sea Snake? We all got our kiss," Kiba yelled, trying to free himself from the hold Orochimaru's tail had on him. He waved a finger with his free arm. "Remember what I said? Now by the time the sun sets on the third day, you have to get your human partner to fall in love with. By love I mean they have to kiss you, and if one of you doesn't succeed you all fail." But Naruto did get his kiss, Iruka yelled. Orochimaru pressed Naruto closer to him. "No, he got his at sunset. I said by sunset, that means before." He smirked as Naruto scowled up to him. Sasuke and Kakashi pushed the rowboat away from the ship and began rowing. A ton of people gathered at the boat's side to see their youngest prince row after some mystery man. Suddenly all attention was turned to a splash that was heard. They looked down and saw a man with long hair swim towards Kakashi and Sasuke's boat. Hiyashi recognized the person and smiled. He turned and looked into the busty crowd. He saw a familiar dress near the front of the ship. So he grabbed Hanabi's arm and dragged her towards Hinata. There looked, You see now Neji is with them, there is nothing to worry about, Hiyashi said. Uh-huh. Hinata said in a too girly tone. Hanabi's eyebrows rose at Hinata's voice. Hinata? Hiyashi called out. Look at me, are you feeling alright? Uh-huh. She answered again, not turning towards the two. Hinata. Look at me. Heishi ordered, then turned her all the way around, his arms on her shoulders. Once Heishi and Hanabi got a look at her, their mouths dropped and Heishi's eyes widened. Neji? Heishi yelled. Why? Yes, Neji stuttered. Where's Hinata? Then it hit him. If Neji was wearing Hinata's dress, then Hinata. Hinata jumped off the ship. Heishi ran towards the edge of the boat looking for his oldest daughter in the waves. Neji turned his head down, blushing. Tom of his white and light blue dress he was wearing. The puffed-out dress was indeed hard to move in, and the frills and light blue ribbons didn't help maneuvering at all. Hanabi walked over to her cousin. Nice dress. Shut up, Neji ordered, not looking at her. Meanwhile, Hinata climbed onto Kakashi and Sasuke's ship. Hinata. Kakashi yelled. I'm getting Kiba back, she said seriously. Yodem shot a bolt from his trident right past Orochimaru's face. Yodem. Orochimaru chuckled, facing him. How are you? He asked playfully. Yodem only tightened his hold on his glowing trident. Let them go. Not a chance. They're mine, Orochimaru said, pressing Naruto closer to him and pulling the other two closer so Yodem could see them. We had a deal. Suddenly Kabuto swam out holding the contract and showed it to Yodem. He examined it, then held up his trident and shot it, sending Kabuto and the contract back. Kabuto hit a rock, but the contract was still perfectly intact. You see? Orochimaru said, gesturing towards the contract. The contract's legal, binding and completely unbreakable. Then he gestured towards the sea kind. Even for you. But I've always been one for a bargain. How about this? I'll set them free, if you take their place. Naruto, Kiba and Iruka's eyes grew wide. Orochimaru only smirked. Have we got a deal? Yodem looked at the three, then turned his head and pointed his trident towards the paper, shooting it. Then his signature appeared on the contract, and Naruto's, Kiba's, and Iruka's disappeared. It's done then, Orochimaru cheered. He unwound his tail, flinging Kiba and Iruka randomly off into the sea, then he flung Naruto away. And the contract wrapped around Yodem and shrunk him till he looked like a sad piece of seaweed with a face. His trident laid on the floor and Naruto crouched by his dad. Dad. He said sadly. Iruka and Kiba looked at Yodem and were about to go over to him when Orochimaru cheered. Finally. It's mine. He laughed as he picked up the trident. Mine. Iruka swam over to him in rage, and put him in a headlock. Orochimaru gagged, then wrapped his tail around Iruka and pulled the mur off of him. Kiba swam up to punch Orochimaru, but Kabuto swam over to him and quickly grabbed his fist. I don't think so. Kabuto taunted, throwing a fist towards Kiba's face. Orochimaru turned to Iruka and began to tighten his hold on the brown-haired mur. Naruto swam to him and reached for the trident, pulling on it. Orochimaru felt the trident being pulled out of his grasp and sneered at Naruto. Then he used the end of the trident and hit the blonde in the stomach. Naruto coiled into a ball and Orochimaru slapped him, sending him towards a nearby rock. Don't mess with me, you little brat, Orochimaru said, holding up the trident, ready to shoot Naruto. But suddenly a spear scraped Orochimaru's arm, causing it to bleed. Infuriated, Orochimaru turned up towards the source and saw Sasuke swimming towards the surface. Sasuke quickly surfaced and took in a gulp of air. Kakashi then dived in, a weapon in hand, Hinata following him. Kakashi shot his spear so that it would hit Orochimaru's tail and free Iruka. But Orochimaru saw this, pulled his tail back, releasing Iruka. Orochimaru saw Iruka swim towards Kakashi, and was about to swim after him but stopped, remembering who he had cornered. Kiba threw a fist at Kabuto and hit him, sending the eel man off towards the middle of the sea. Hinata swam behind Kabuto and used the palm of her hand to hit him in the back of the neck. Kabuto's face flew forwards right towards Kiba's punch, which connected directly with his face. Right after Hinata hit Kabuto, she swam towards the surface for air. Orochimaru turned back to Naruto, a sick grin on his face. Then he turned back towards all the commotion and aimed his trident right at Sasuke's body, which was swimming towards them. Say goodbye to your sweetheart, he seethed, powering up the trident. Naruto scrambled up, then grabbed Orochimaru's hair and pulled on it. It was perfect timing because Kiba had just hit World Kabuto over and the lightning from the trident hit Kabuto instead of Sasuke. Naruto immediately let go of Orochimaru and swam over to Sasuke and the rest of the group. Kabuto! Orochimaru yelled, catching some of Kabuto's remains. My poor little poopsie. Then he sneered up to the group of humans and mermen and growled. Once they all reunited at the surface, Kakashi held Iruka, as did Sasuke to Naruto and Hinata to Kiba. You all have to get out of here, Iruka said, pushing Kakashi away. No! Kakashi yelled, pressing Iruka against him, we're not leaving. And before any more could be said, the water started to go out of control, waves grew and the sky darkened. Then millions to billions of bubbles erupted from the water underneath them. Kiba pulled Hinata closer to him as they were pushed away from the rest of the group. Iruka and Kakashi were being separated but managed to keep a hold of each other's hands. They pulled each other closer until they were able to connect both hands with each other. Then Orochimaru burst from underneath them, causing Iruka, Kakashi, Hinata, and Kiba to tumble off and into the raging sea. Naruto and Sasuke rose with Orochimaru. To get off the rising giant, Naruto grabbed Sasuke's hand and pulled him off so that they both dove into the water. Once they both surfaced, they grabbed onto each other and looked up to see the giant sea snake. Orochimaru cackled loudly, whipping his tail in random directions. You pitiful, insignificant fools. Now I am the ruler of all the sea. He held the trident in the air, lightning shot out and the sky darkened further. The waves obey my every whim. A gigantic wave came crashing down onto Hinata and Kiba. They tried to hold onto each other, but the pull was too strong and they were thrown in separate directions. The sea and all its spoils bow to my power, he roared, sticking the trident into the water. He then made a circle with the trident, causing a giant whirlpool to form. Sunken ships that laid at the bottom of the sea surfaced and floated around the whirlpool. Kakashi got swept away with the current and Iruka grabbed onto a rock. Wrapping his tail and arms around the rock, he looked around to see if he could spot Kakashi. He yelled Kakashi's name as he watched the man get swept underneath a ship. When Kakashi was under the ship, his hands searched frantically for something to grab onto. Finally, finding some rope, he grabbed it and climbed up. Once he surfaced, something bumped into him. The thing that bumped into him then grabbed onto his shirt, like it was its lifeline. Kakashi looked down to see Hinata. He hoisted Hinata up and demanded that she keep a tight grip around his neck so that she wouldn't fall. After Kakashi got both of them onto the ship, he fell onto the waterlogged floor, gasping for air. Hinata has a very strong grip, he thought, taking in deep breaths. Hinata looked around the ship and spotted something over by the steering wheel. So she ran, falling a couple of times as the boat rocked, until she made it to the steering wheel. Kiba! She yelled, seeing the brunette lying on the floor. Kakashi walked up behind her and went to check Kiba for any injuries. Kiba! Hinata continued to yell, sitting besides the merman. Kiba, are you okay? Please answer. Kakashi slapped Kiba on the face a couple of times till he came to. The first thing the merman noticed was Hinata. Hinata! He yelled as she flew to him, locking her arms around his neck. Kakashi stood up, and held his hand over his eye and tried to see if he could spot Iruka. With no such luck, he sighed, then yelled over to the two. We have to stop him. As that was happening with the others, Naruto and Sasuke still tried desperately to keep a hold on each other. Feeling their hands slipping, Naruto wrapped his tail around Sasuke's legs. This allowed them to stay closer to each other. But it took away the only things that kept them above water. Now being underwater for Naruto was no problem, but Sasuke couldn't breathe, so as soon as they were pulled under, Sasuke's body std trying to get back up for air. Desperately, Naruto pulled up as much air as he could and grabbed Sasuke's head and crashed his lips against the ravens. Not really the time for this, Sasuke thought as Naruto forced his mouth open. But then Sasuke found that he could breathe again, and tightened his grip on Naruto. He plunged his tongue into Naruto's mouth, and Naruto's tongue met his. The two wrapped their tongues around each other, then had each of their tongues explore the other's mouth. And although they were in real danger, it was the best kiss the both of them had so far. But it didn't last, as both of them reached the bottom of the whirlpool. They were thrown out of the water and onto the sandy sea floor. They separated and looked up at the walls of water. Sasuke stood up and offered his hand to Naruto so that he could carry him or something. But then a bolt stopped their movement. The lightning hit the sand near them, turning it to sharp, dangerous glass. Sasuke and Naruto looked over to it wide-eyed, then looked up to see Orochimaru pointing his trident towards the two of them. Orochimaru laughed, then shot again. Naruto and Sasuke jumped back, in opposite directions. As Sasuke tried to go back to reunite with Naruto, Orochimaru would try to shoot him, and if Naruto tried to hop over to Sasuke, he'd shoot at Naruto. Separated at the opposite end of the whirlpool, Sasuke looked at Naruto helplessly as glassed sand blocked all his movements, almost backing him up into the water wall. They both looked up fearful as Orochimaru chuckled darkly. Orochimaru straightened himself up and rose the trident, yelling, "So much for true love." But before he could attempt to strike either of them down, Kakashi's boat rammed right into him, the front of the boat slicing straight through him. He screamed in agony and dropped the trident. Kakashi let go of the steering wheel and turned over to the other two. "Jump off now," he ordered. Hinata and Kakashi grabbed Kiba as they ran over to the side of the boat. Kiba looked back and saw the sea snake's tail coming towards them. He yanked his arms out of Kakashi's grasp and pushed the man over the side of the ship. Then he did the same to Hinata, forcing the girl to release his tail. As the two resurfaced, they didn't have time to look for Kiba or Iruka as the back of the ship broke off and crashed into the water, creating a giant wave. The wave rushed towards the two and pushed them into the water. And as Kakashi was going unconscious, he saw the same outline as he did the first time he was drowning. Naruto and Sasuke watched as the doomed sea serpent cried out in pain, but their attention was driven away when they both looked around the whirlpool as the sea rumbled and the whirlpool collapsed on top of them. Sasuke couldn't handle the pressure of the water and the lack of oxygen, so he reached around for the direction where he thought Naruto was. But his hands met nothing and he fell into unconsciousness. Naruto's body tumbled and twirled in the water, and then once he straightened himself out, he looked for Sasuke. He gasped and swam frantically over to the raven. He immediately opened up the raven's mouth and pushed in as much air as he could. Then he wasted no time and swam as fast as he could towards the surface. Meanwhile, the trident shrunk back to its normal size and floated back down to its original owner. As soon as the trident landed near Yodem, he regained his size and picked it up. He then turned and watched as thousands of other mermaids and mermen emerged from inside Orochimaru's lair, released from the serpent's spell. Yodem, Kiba's mom, Sume, and Hana, Kiba's sister, surfaced and watched the three mermen lying on the beach. Iruka's parents had died in a tragic waterquake, so Yodem took on the role of Iruka's father. "They really love them," Hana said, smiling, watching as Kiba cradled Hinata in his arms. Kiba had a couple of cuts on him from crawling over the ship's side, but Hinata was safe and that's all that mattered in his mind. Sume sighed and folded her arms in front of her chest. "Yeah." Yodem watched the three mermen and humans. Iruka lay next to Kakashi, moving the man's silver hair out of the way of his eye patch. He smiled as Kakashi's nose would wrinkle each time Iruka's hands got too close to the eye patch. Naruto had Sasuke's head on his tail, near his stomach. His tan hands were stroking the raven's hair delicately and his other hand he used to keep himself propped up. He smiled sadly down to Sasuke, upset with himself for causing all of this, and upset because he knew he wouldn't be with Sasuke. Yodem copied his son's smile and shook his head. "Only one problem left." "What's that, your majesty?" Sume asked, turning towards the Sea King. Yodem looked up to the three. "How much I'm going to miss them." "Yeah," Sume said after a moment, and Hana just smiled at her brother. Yodem laid his trident flat on the water and a golden flow of water emitted from it and headed towards the three. It traveled out of the water and latched onto the three's tails. Kiba let go of Hinata and gently laid her down. He looked at his tail and watched as it turned into a pair of clothed legs. He smiled, then smiled over towards his mom and sister, who smiled and waved back to him. Then Iruka was hit and he immediately knew what the glow was doing. He also smiled and bowed to the three, who only laughed and smiled. Naruto noticed something happening to his tail, so he lifted his gaze from Sasuke's face over to his fins. His sad smile quickly turned into a bright, joyful smile. He looked up at his dad and his father smiled up to him and raised his trident a little, as if he was making a toast. Naruto smiled more and was about to yell out a thank you, when Sasuke started to move. Naruto looked down as Sasuke sat up, clutching his head. Sasuke blinked and lowered his hand. He looked around then focused in on Naruto. He smiled at the blonde. Naruto smiled then jumped at the raven. Sasuke let out a scream as Naruto jumped on top of him, wrapping his arms around the raven's neck. Sasuke sighed and smiled even more. "Dobi," he whispered then hugged the blonde closer. But he pulled away and pushed Naruto off of him. Naruto was about to yell at him but Sasuke interrupted him. "You have legs? How do you have legs?" "What?" Sasuke groaned, feeling a headache coming on. This was just too complicated. Sasuke sighed then looked up to Naruto and smiled, then grabbed the back of Naruto's neck. "Oh well," he said then crushed his and Naruto's lips together. Once Kakashi woke up he immediately noticed Iruka's legs and forced a makeout session onto Iruka, which Iruka didn't protest against. Then Hinata woke up and she cried on Kiba's shoulder, when he finished telling her about his legs and such. Then he gave her a peck on the cheek and she returned it with a peck on the lips. But unfortunately they didn't get to make out because Neji and the others ran over to them. All 6 of them went silent and stared at Neji until Kakashi spoke up. "For clarification, that's a dress," he pointed to Neji, "and it's supposed to be worn by women." Sasuke chuckled as he tightened his squeeze on Naruto's hand. Hinata blushed and muttered an apology while looking at the ground. Iruka and Naruto looked confused, but didn't let go of Kakashi or Sasuke. Then something clicked in Kiba's mind and he turned towards Hinata, his arms still around her shoulders. "Weren't you wearing that?" he asked pointing then glaring at Neji. They all walked back to the palace, questions filling in the conversation. Once back in the palace, another silence surrounded them, as all the employees took in the view of their youngest prince wearing tattered clothing and soaking wet, and Neji wearing a dress. Questions again began to erupt from all sides. Not being able to stand it anymore, Sasuke grabbed Naruto's hand, that he let go while on their walk back to the palace, and ran towards his room. Sasuke sighed as he leaned against his bedroom door, relieved. He let the silence of his room surround him and took in some air. While doing this once he was finished he looked up towards Naruto, who was standing in the middle of his room scoping the place out. "All right," Sasuke said. He took a seat on his bed then patted the spot next to him, silently asking Naruto to join him. Naruto did and he sighed again, then rubbed his temples preparing himself. "Okay. Explain to me," calmly. He added in recalling all the commotion on their walk back. "How you're a merman that had a voice, then lost his voice, and turned into a human and then got his voice back." "Okay." Naruto then explained to Sasuke everything that happened with Orochimaru. "So you did save me that one time?" Sasuke asked, his eyes locked with Naruto's. "Yup." Naruto answered smiling. "And you're a prince?" Sasuke asked with one eyebrow raised. "Yeah," Naruto said. Sasuke rubbed his temples then flopped back onto his bed. "Wow." Naruto looked at Sasuke as the raven closed his eyes and let the information sink in. Then he laid down so that he would be lying next to Sasuke. "Anything else?" Naruto asked, turning his head to look at Sasuke. Sasuke was silent for a moment then opened his eyes and turned towards Naruto, and with a serious expression he asked. "Hinata's story, was that about you?" Naruto immediately tensed as he stuttered out a yes then turned away from Sasuke so he was facing the ceiling. "I don't know if you know this, but after I saw that swirl on your stomach," Sasuke started still staring at Naruto's face, but Naruto interrupted. "Scar, it's a scar, along with these marks on my cheeks," Naruto explained sadly, with his eyes closed. Sasuke was silent for a moment before starting up again. "Well, I found out that you were experimented on, that's what I heard at least." He rushed. "Is that true?" "Yup," Naruto said, somewhat angrily. "Can you tell me what happened?" Sasuke asked. Naruto sighed then sat up. Sasuke followed right after him. He opened his eyes and kept them focused on the bed's comforter. "I was little, around 12 years old, and I went out for a swim. I saw a small human ship and at the time we thought you were all friendly." He seethed out the last part, clenching his fists. "So I swam over to the ship, but once the humans saw me they immediately took interest in me. They asked a bunch of questions about merpeople and other simple things. I answered them, but then they decided they wanted to know more about Merman's body." He closed his eyes tightly clenching his fists. Sasuke guessed what happened next and draped an arm around the blonde's shoulder. Naruto leaned against Sasuke, instantly relaxing. Sorry. Sasuke rushed out. Naruto opened his eyes, sat up straight, and looked at Sasuke confused. What? I said sorry. Sasuke repeated in a hurry, looking directly at Naruto. Naruto's face took on a blank face, then he smiled and jumped on top of Sasuke. I love you. Sasuke fell back onto his bed and after hearing Naruto wrapped his arms around the blonde. Naruto moved around on top of Sasuke and Sasuke's blushed a bit as Naruto rubbed against something. Naruto? He called. Yeah. Was Naruto's muffled response, since his face was currently buried in Sasuke's hair. You don't know a lot about humans, do you? He strained out. Naruto twitched and sat up on top of Sasuke and glared down to the human prince. I know a lot about you humans. How dare you say that? Calm down, Dobi. Sasuke took in a breath of air. It's just that you're sitting and rubbing against something that you really shouldn't be. Yet. He smirked. Naruto sat there and looked around. What? Naruto glared at him. Duh, of course I do. He yelled, then a thought came to him. Wait, how do humans do it? Well, it's different for us because we're both guys, but it starts. Sasuke was interrupted by Naruto. Does it start with this? Naruto asked, kissing Sasuke lightly on the lips, then pushing deeper into it. Sasuke fell back onto the bed as Naruto laid on top of him. Sasuke slowly lifted his arms and wrapped them around Naruto's neck. Their tongues kept clashing together and then they explored each other's mouths some more, causing both boys to moan. Then breaking for air, Naruto asked. Well, catching his breath, Sasuke responded. Yeah, that's usually how it starts, then we do this. Sasuke reached his hand up Naruto's shirt and rubbed his palm all over the blonde's chest. Naruto moaned and used his hands to grip Sasuke's shoulders as Sasuke's other hand traveled up his back, tracing his backbone. Naruto opened his eyes and gave Sasuke a lust-filled stare before pushing his mouth on top of the raven's. Sasuke only broke their kiss to take off Naruto's shirt, and then he tore his own off. Naruto stopped and examined Sasuke's torso, tracing his abs with his fingers. You're really pale. Naruto whispered, while letting Sasuke pull him back on top of him. HN. Was Sasuke's response, as he attached his mouth onto Naruto's neck. Naruto moaned as Sasuke sucked on his neck. Sasuke smirked, then flipped them so that he was on top. Then he straddled Naruto and proceeded his attack on Naruto's neck. Naruto moaned and moved his head to the side, allowing Sasuke more room. Sasuke smirked, then unbuttoned Naruto's pants and stuck his hand down them. Ah! Naruto cried. Wah! Sasuke looked up to him. This will feel really good, trust me. Oh, okay. Naruto managed to say as Sasuke pumped him. Sasuke twirled his fingers around Naruto's head, causing Naruto to throw his head back in a moan. It feels good, doesn't it? Sasuke asked, moving to nibble on Naruto's ear. Yee. Ah, was Naruto's weak response. Wah. Ah. Naruto tried to ask what was going on but couldn't. Sasuke only continued his ministrations, then with his other hand, grabbed the back of Naruto's neck and pulled him into a kiss. Naruto couldn't concentrate on anything and his mind clouded over. Then he began to feel a huge amount of pressure where Sasuke's hand was. He pulled out of the kiss and Sasuke let his mouth leave small kisses around Naruto's chin. Sasuke, Naruto yelled, feeling the tension leave him. Sasuke smiled down at Naruto, who was panting and flushed. Naruto smiled up to him. Yeah, it was incredible. Sasuke sighed, closing his eyes. We shouldn't do this till after the wedding. Then looked back at a sweat-covered Naruto, his blonde hair stuck to his face and hickeys decorating his neck. Oh well. He smirked and tugged at Naruto's pants. Then you're going to love this. Sasuke licked his lips at Naruto's appearance. Naruto noticed this and tilted his head to one side. What? He asked, confused. Sasuke shook his head, then went to hover over Naruto. Just relax, okay? It might hurt at first, but trust me, it gets better. Naruto nodded and threw his arms around Sasuke's neck, then nibbled on the raven's earlobe. I can take it, so let's do it. At those words, Sasuke's erection twitched. Just a minute, Sasuke said, then got up again. Naruto groaned watching the raven get up and go over to his nightstand. Sasuke rummaged through his drawer then let out a victorious sound as he pulled out some lube. Naruto again looked at Sasuke confused. Sasuke smiled at him then poured the lube into his hand and coated his fingers. "Okay. This is going to feel weird but just try to relax," Sasuke said as he lifted Naruto's legs over his shoulders. Naruto nodded and smiled. "I can take anything." Sasuke shuddered and used every ounce of willpower he possessed to not slam right into Naruto's tight virgin hole. Letting out a huge sigh, he pushed one of his fingers into Naruto. Naruto groaned in discomfort but tried to remain calm. Sasuke moaned at the feeling. His finger was being sucked in and out of Naruto's hole and the heat felt great. His patience was really being tested here. Carefully he added another finger and moved them both around, which caused Naruto to gasp and let out a long displeased groan. "Relax." Sasuke tried to soothe him. "You relax," Naruto bit back. It made no sense, but Naruto's body did relax a little more and Sasuke put in another finger. "Ah, N-O. Out." Naruto chalked out reaching towards Sasuke's hand. "Shish." Moved his fingers around. "It'll get better, I promise. This is going to feel really good in a moment." Naruto opened a half-lidded eye and nodded then closed his eyes again. Then after Sasuke was done preparing him, Sasuke pulled his 3 fingers out. Naruto gasped and opened up his half-lidded eyes. "Okay," Sasuke said, coating himself. He moaned as the lube smeared across his hard erection then readied himself at Naruto's entrance. "This will hurt but it'll get better," he gave Naruto a smile. Naruto smiled back and prepared himself. Then Sasuke pushed his head into Naruto, who half yelled then closed his mouth and groaned. Sasuke gasped then moaned and couldn't stop from pushing himself further in till he was all the way sheathed inside Naruto. He moaned and leaned over closer to Naruto. "This is amazing." Hey," Naruto said leaning up slightly and lightly tugging at Sasuke's hair. Sasuke shot his head up and Naruto glared at him. Move. It feels way weird." Oh, Sasuke said. Right. He pulled out except for his head and slammed back into the blonde. Did that feel good?" he asked enjoying Naruto's heat. Naruto screwed his head into the sheets. "Why, yeah." This caused Sasuke to smile, so he pulled out and slammed back again, trying to keep the right angle and hit the same spot. "Oh," Naruto shouted. That must be the spot," Sasuke thought and moaned as he pushed back in again. Sasuke thrusted back into Naruto and Naruto threw his head back. The tension that had built up inside him again was released once more. Sasuke, still inside Naruto as he came, couldn't handle the pressure Naruto's body was surrounding him with. Overcome with pleasure, the raven threw his head back in pure bliss. "Naruto!" he screamed as he came inside his lover. The next morning they all ate breakfast together and filled in any unanswered questions. Then Mikoto brought up how much of a waste the wedding ship would be if they didn't have at least one wedding. After breakfast, Kakashi took Iruka around the marketplace again so that now he could actually see everything. Then he proposed to Iruka while they were walking back to the palace. With Kiba and Hinata, Kiba dropped Hinata off with her sister Hanabi. Then Kiba went off to find Hiyashi and Neji. Mainly Hiyashi, but he ran into Neji along the way and the long-haired brunette followed him. Once Kiba had Hiyashi's undivided attention, he asked for permission to marry Hinata. Neji about fainted when Hiyashi instantly replied, "Yes, you may." After Hiyashi answered, he turned and left, leaving a shocked Kiba and Neji. Neji turned to Kiba and then started listing off the rules with Hinata, like no touching her inappropriately or trying to get her to do anything dirty. After a while Kiba just got tired of hearing Neji, so he just snuck away while Neji was explaining everything. And Neji didn't notice since he closed his eyes while he was explaining the ground rules. Then Kiba went over to Hinata, gave her a kiss on the cheek, then asked her in front of Hanabi to marry him, which turned out to be helpful because Hinata fainted as she was stuttering out a yes. Sasuke kept watching Naruto and helping him while the blonde kept cursing him out because he couldn't walk normally. Sasuke had ramen made as an apology, and Naruto ate it bowl after bowl, until there were 10 bowls stacked on top of each other. Sasuke sighed then offered to take him out on the town again. Instead, they went for a walk on the beach. About what my mom said earlier, Sasuke said as he walked over to Naruto. Yeah? Well, the ship's supposed to be for my wedding, so. Sasuke turned his head down to the sand, then took a deep breath. Will you, ma? Sasuke. Naruto yelled, jumping onto the raven. Sasuke and Naruto staggered back, then Naruto gave him a passionate kiss on the mouth, which caught Sasuke off guard, and before he could really get into it, Naruto pulled away. Of course I'll marry you, jerk, Naruto said, smiling. Sasuke smiled, then grabbed Naruto's chin and gave him another kiss. In the throne room, all three couples arrived at the same time and each demanded that they have their wedding on the ship. Makoto looked to Fugaku and smiled. What are we going to do? Smile. Fugaku rubbed the bridge of his nose in exhaustion, who knew marring his son off would be so much trouble. We're going to need a bigger boat, Itachi commented. Finally, they did get a larger boat, and days later all three married, with a rather large audience. Mermen and mermaids came out of the sea and watched. Kiba's mom and sister gave him a lecture about treating Hinata with respect. Then they both gave Hinata compliments and told her about Kiba's bad habits and what to watch for. Kakashi had to keep Guy away from Iruka because he kept trying to ask Iruka to help him in playing pranks on Kakashi. Itachi took a small amount of pity on Iruka, so he accidentally hit Guy on the head, causing him to pass out. Naruto ran over to the edge of the ship and watched as his father commanded the waves to lift him to Naruto. They hugged, and then Naruto beckoned for Sasuke and his family to come see his dad. They all exchanged hellos and talked for a bit, then Yodayami said goodbye to them and gave his son a goodbye hug. Bye, Dad, Naruto whispered as they broke their hug. Yodayami and the other Mers waved, then dove under the water. Kiba, Iruka, and Naruto all yelled goodbye, then kissed their partners. The end. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next part.